The Blood Diary. The archive room of the Iowa County Library reeked of rot. The shelves sagged like tired old men, straining under the weight of forgotten years. Dust clung to the spines of books like moss on a grave. I flipped through yellowed clippings, blurred photographs, dead echoes on dead paper, until my hand found it. A leather-bound notebook, wedged deep in the shadows as if it wanted to stay hidden. No title, just a dark brown stain at the corner, dried stiff like a tendon of blood. The cover felt strangely heavy in my hands, damp with a greasy film. Not coffee, not ink. It was the sour, metallic tang of rust, of blood. I opened it. The handwriting lurched across the page, like the last scrawl of someone dying. That night, the axe never stopped. The edge of the paper was torn, the ink blurred as if drowned. Below it, the number, 1912. I turned more pages. Newspaper scraps, personal notes, confessions, some crossed out, some smeared red-brown, some ripped clean out, leaving blank spaces more terrifying than words themselves. And then, thud, 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 3 heavy knocks. Not in the room. Inside my skull. I dropped the book, but it clung to my hands, burning hot. The letters writhed red, twisting like live insects crawling across the page. The room spun. The light flickered. A wind screamed through the cracks, though every window was shut. Whispers swarmed my ears. A woman sobbing, a child laughing then choking, a man chanting scripture, and beneath it all, the dull chop of an axe. A voice hissed against my ear. You will see. You will remember. But you will do nothing. Then, darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the library. I stood on a dirt road in Iowa, summer of 1912. The air clung hot and damp with straw and mud. Before me loomed the Marlowe house. 2 stories of silent timber. Every window black, like the dead eyes of a coffin. The villagers had gathered outside, oil lamps trembling in their hands, their faces pale and hollow. Whispers pricked my ears like needles. This is God's punishment. No, it's Jameson sending a message. I saw a stranger on the midnight train. 8 bodies. That can't be chance. Rumors coiled tighter and tighter, a web wrapping around the house. I felt it in my bones. This town was hiding something, and the blood inside that house was only the curtain. Beside me stood Samuel Stenner, a local reporter. But he was not a reporter tonight. He was a father. He had just returned from an assignment, leather satchel slung over his shoulder, notebook in hand, eyes hollow. In his breast pocket, 2 small gifts wrapped in wax paper. Presents for Elsie and Nora. Promises he would never keep. Sheriff Dwyer shuffled forward, mustache ragged, badge rusted. He lowered his voice. Stenner, don't go in. The scene is a mess. Samuel didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the house. A look every man understood. Whatever waited inside, he would face it. Not for his job, for his daughters. He stepped onto the porch. I followed, bound to him like a shadow. The door creaked open, spilling a breath of cold, metallic stench that clawed at my skin. The hallway revealed itself, floorboards stained brown, soaked deep like the handprints of death. On the dining table, a half-eaten loaf of bread. A cup of milk spilled across the wood, white mixing with red. A moment of life, frozen mid-laugh, shattered into horror. Every mirror in the house had been draped in black cloth. No reflections, no faces, as if someone had tried to erase the dead themselves. Samuel raised his pen. His hand trembled, but the nib cut into the paper anyway. 8 souls. A house silent as stone, death heavy as night. He reached the bedroom door. His hand hovered on the knob, shaking. I knew who was inside. His 2 little girls. He opened it. The lamplight caught the quilt, soaked dark. Small bodies hidden beneath, faces covered. Samuel did not cry. He only pulled the 2 wax paper gifts from his pocket and crushed them in his fist until they bent and tore. Promises broken forever. I choked, wanted to scream, to stop him, but I couldn't. Only the sound of his pen scratching the page like a blade tearing flesh. Outside, the villagers still whispered, religion, politics, money, vengeance, gangs. Every rumor a piece of a puzzle. Yet together, they made nothing but a void. I looked at Samuel. His hand still moved. Every trembling word chained me closer to him. From this moment on, I was bound to follow him. Through every door, every theory, every shadow. Because this house held more than 8 bodies. It held 8 doors. And behind each door, a different killer. But all the doors led to the same stain. That night, the axe never stopped. It echoes still. In the walls. In the paper. In the marrow of my bones. And now it echoes in you. The sealed house. The Marlowe door hung half open. A mouth of wood, gaping but silent, breathing out the raw, metallic stench of rusted iron steeped in rain. Samuel Stenner stood frozen on the porch, his hand trembling on the knob as if it were the skin of some dying beast. Behind him, the crowd was silent. Not the reverent silence of grief, but the heavy silence of curiosity, dread, and something darker they didn't dare name. I pressed close behind his shoulder, invisible, condemned to witness. His breath came ragged, chest heaving. From the crack in the door, the smell of blood drifted outward, thin, persistent, clawing at my nose like hot nails. Sheriff Dwyer lingered off to the side, face red but eyes averted. He spoke again, voice cracked, like a man begging his own shadow. "Mr. Stenner, best not to go in. The scene, it's messy." But I knew better. All morning, the villagers had treated this house like a carnival of death. Curtains yanked aside to peek at corpses. Locks of hair snipped and pocketed. A shard of bone taken as a keepsake. A massacre turned into a grotesque sideshow. I shivered. The 8 bodies inside were terrible enough. But worse than death was a town that treated it like entertainment. Samuel gave no reply. He pushed the door. The hinge screamed, metal grinding bone. A wave of cold air surged out. Not the cold of weather, but the cold of rooms emptied of all breath. My lungs clamped tight as if blood itself had congealed inside them. The hallway yawned before us. Faded lamplight spilled across the floorboards, streaked and blotched with brown, crawling forward like broken arms. This was not just blood. This was memory, screams petrified into the grain of the wood. Samuel stepped in, and I was dragged with him, shadow shackled to his heel. The parlor was chaos. Chairs toppled. The dining table split at one corner. Curtains askew. On the table, half a loaf of bread, marked with tea. A glass of milk overturned. White liquid spilled across the wood, dripping down to the floor where it bled into red, forming a pale pink froth that made my stomach twist. It wasn't the blood that strangled me. It was the milk. Child's drink, still warm from someone's lips. Now it had curdled into a foamy stain the color of sick lungs. That detail weighed heavier than the corpses, proof that laughter had lived here only hours ago. Samuel opened his notebook. His pen trembled, then carved across the page. Meal abandoned. Time cut short. No chance. Outside, the whispers swelled, binding together into a diseased chorus. "This is God's punishment." No, Jameson sent a warning. Stranger on the midnight train. Each rumor was another blade, carving deeper into a crime already drenched in blood. And I thought, maybe this town didn't want the truth at all, because the truth would drag too many of them down with it. Sheriff Dwyer shuffled inside, hat twisting in his hands, his voice hollow. We tried to hold them back, but the people just kept pouring in. Samuel lifted his eyes. No anger, no blame, just the flat gaze of a man staring at rot too deep for bandages. On the wall, blood spattered high, fingers of red stretching upward like hands clawing for help. Across the hallway, footprints overlapped, layer upon layer, some heavy boots, some small soles, some round heels. Whose prints? The killers? The sheriff's? Or the vultures who paraded through afterward? The scene was a maze of false trails, a painting smeared beyond repair. And in my head, the words surfaced, cold and blunt. Justice died a second death, not just with 8 bodies, but with the 100 feet that crushed truth into dust. Samuel crouched by a shattered chair, touching a dried clump of blood. His hand shook, but his eyes burned. He whispered, "They weren't just killed, they were erased." A chill cut down my spine. He was right. Faces hidden, mirrors shrouded, dinner half-eaten. This wasn't murder. It was ritual, an erasure of names. A sacrifice. In the corner, The oil lamp guttered. Its weak flame quivered like a lost soul, warping shadows into grotesque shapes. The house had become a stage, lit for a ceremony of the damned. Samuel halted at a bedroom door. He opened it. Lamplight fell across a thick quilt, soaked dark. Pillows once white, now rust brown. Two small shapes under the cloth. Elsie, Nora, his daughters. The air turned to stone. A weight pressed my chest as if a slab had been lowered onto it. Samuel's hands shook violently, but he did not cry. Not one tear. His pen tore the page. They aren't sleeping. Their dreams were taken. In my skull, the axe began again. One blow, then another, as if the night itself hadn't ended. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. The copper stink mixed with the dampness of children's hair made bile rise in my throat. Samuel knelt. His hand reached out, then withdrew. He wanted to touch their faces. He didn't. Couldn't. The evidence had to be preserved. But preserved for what, when 100 careless feet had already trampled the truth? Outside the window, the village murmured. It's a rite, covered mirrors, shrouded faces. Like those sects out by the marsh. No, Jameson sent men. Marlowe crossed him. Could be the rail killer. Kansas, Colorado. Each rumor drifted like a ghost, circling the dead. Samuel moved to the next room. He opened the door. For more children beneath linens. Every face erased by cloth. My mouth stayed shut, but my mind screamed. Why kill the children? Samuel wrote, letters slanting. 8 souls. No witnesses. No lullabies. No dreams. For a split second, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. A man in the corner, axe in hand, eyes emptied out. Memory or hallucination, I couldn't tell. My pulse hammered. Sweat chilled my neck. We left the room and went downstairs. In the corner stood the axe, half crusted with dried blood, blade dulled and dark. The weapon seemed to dare us. I'm right here. Catch me, if you can. Dwyer stared at it, sweat beading. Terrible, he muttered. But he gave no order. Set no cordon. Only helplessness. Footprints over footprints. Blood smeared by curious souls. The crime scene read like a book ripped to shreds. Somewhere far off, the killer must have smiled, watching truth buried beneath a mountain of forgeries. Samuel sat on the stair. He wrote slowly, decisively. Justice killed a second time. My spine went ice cold. In this house, death hadn't stopped at 8 bodies. It spread. It killed faith. It killed justice. It killed truth. Outside, the whispers kept piling on. Each word another layer of mud smothering the last embers of honesty. I knew then, from this moment on, the case wasn't just about finding a killer. It was a pilgrimage through lies, through dark rites, toward a gloved hand hiding in plain sight. Samuel stood. His shoulders trembled. His hand still gripped the pen. I clung to his back like a shackled ghost. Each footstep creaked the boards, sharp, dry, biting. The sound crawled into my head and set a second heartbeat there. The Marlowe door hung half open again, a heavy wooden mouth breathing the metallic stink of rain-soaked iron. Samuel stood rigid on the threshold, palm on the knob, trembling as if he had touched the hide of a dying animal. Behind him, the crowd swelled, silent, not with reverence but with dread, hunger, and the kind of excitement people won't admit to. I was right behind his shoulder, unseen, conscripted witness. His breath short and hard. From the crack, the smell of blood slid out again, thin and relentless, clawing my nose like hot talons. It mixed with wet wood, candle ash, a faint trace of cheap soap, the scent of ordinary life cut off mid-sentence. Dwyer hovered to the left, mustache ragged, badge stained dull under the lamp. Best not to go in, he repeated, voice frayed and wandering, like a man apologizing to his own shadow. The scene, it's messy. His words fell to the porch and shattered. I knew the truth. By morning, hundreds had come and gone. Shrouds peeled back just to peek. A lock of hair pocketed. A strip of cloth for a story tomorrow. Samuel didn't answer. He stared into the narrow slit of what like into a pit. He touched his breast pocket. The wax paper crinkled softly. 2 small gifts. For Elsie and Nora. Promises intact. Recipients gone. He pushed the door. The hinge shrieked, metal grinding bone. The cold that rushed out wasn't weather. It was the cold of a house with no breath left in it. The hallway opened like a throat. Oil lamp light from within trembled into a thin, yellow vein. enough to show the brown stains at the edges of the boards, darker toward the center, like a poisonous blossom sinking its color into the grain. Not just blood, memory, screams frozen into wood. Samuel went in. I followed, a tethered shadow. The parlor lay in a language beyond words. Chairs fallen, a table split, curtains torn askew, a wall clock frozen still. On the table, half a loaf, teeth marks still fresh. A glass of milk spilled. The white ran off the edge, dripped to the floor, and bled into red until it turned a sickly pink that clenched my gut. It wasn't the blood that gagged me. It was the milk, still warm once from a mouth that now would never speak. This had been a home, a few hours ago. Now it was a photograph of life, torn down the middle. Samuel's notebook snapped open. His nib cut a black seam. Then words. Meal abandoned. Time severed. No chance. His hand shook, but the pen stayed true, a blade steadying its wielder. On the porch, the sea of whispers swelled. God's punishment. No, Jameson's warning. Stranger off the night train. A fire by the old church. A low, groaning undertow that wrapped the house like coils of rope. The town was binding itself with its own tongue. Dwyer drifted in, clutching his soft hat like a life preserver. We tried to keep them out. But the crowd, his voice thinned on the word crowd, as if he knew how empty the excuse was. Samuel looked up, neither blaming nor forgiving, just measuring the ruin in a man already beaten. I stepped back to take it all in. Blood climbed the wall like fingers reaching, then trapped. The hallway was a rug of crisscrossed prints, boot treads, small flats, round heels, none of them trustworthy. The scene sounded like a drunk orchestra, each musician shoving, the melody of the crime smeared into noise. Justice died a second time. Cold, short, final. On a sideboard, an oil lamp tilted, its wick burned to the nub. The flame bowed and shivered like a soul about to wink out. It didn't brighten the room. It warped it, throwing monstrous silhouettes onto the walls. In those shapes, I sensed eyes that would not be seen. Every mirror shrouded. No reflections. No names. A careful hand had erased every surface that could speak. Samuel added, mirrors covered, faces shrouded. He stopped at those dashes, as if certain verbs would fracture his lungs. Some words must be held in silence. We passed through the narrow kitchen. A ribbon of water still trembled in the sink, blinking back the lamp like a tired eyelid. The tablecloth had been tugged, one corner dangled. The tabletop shone in patches where a wet rag had rubbed and then given up. Half wiped, someone rushed. A faint scratch canted by the doorframe, the skid of a heel cutting the night. Each detail a cold nail driven into the brain. Samuel paused, palm pressed over the gifts in his pocket. The wax paper whispered once, then fell quiet. He drew a long breath, swallowing whatever threatened to rise in his throat. No tears. Not anymore. The pen had to stand where tears would wash the line away. A family portrait on the mantel face down. Or someone had turned it. I couldn't know. But a frame with its back toward you hurts worse than a face. Absence. That was the motif tonight. Torn pages, blank squares in a ledger I hadn't yet seen but already feared. A frame turned away, mirrors draped. Every surface that could return your gaze, smothered. We'll put up a barrier. Right away, Dwyer called to someone at the door, as if speaking to his conscience. The lamp sputtered at a lick of damp air. He avoided looking at the axe propped by the stairs, the haft stained dark, the blade dulled. Someone had lifted it, then set it back like a black flag staked in the heart of the house. I'm still here. You're too late. Samuel didn't touch the axe, didn't even study it. He stared at the staircase. The run of steps shrank in my eyes into a tight tunnel leading to a part of the house no light wanted. The fourth tread dipped, weight pressed there once. If someone climbed that night, this step would have groaned. Did it? I listened and heard only one sound. Samuel's heart. Fast. Hard. Steady. Go up. The thought moved through him and into me. I followed. Dwyer followed halfway, stopped, half spoke and swallowed it like a man who'd bitten stone. On the landing, a black cloth hung over a mirror. I lifted my eyes to the thinnest patch where light seeped to a faint blur. If we peeled it back, what would the mirror show? The Axeman? Or the living, already turning on one another? Cloth doesn't cover itself. Someone walked this house after the blade went quiet, hiding the dead and the living from their own faces. Not covering. Erasing. Samuel set his pen to paper and wrote in tight, deliberate strokes. Covered mirrors equals intent. Erase identity. He added a small arrow into the margin. Church. A whisper to himself. A door on the left stood ajar. A gentler draft slid through, soft enough to bow our lamp a fraction. Paper rustled. The corner of a calendar lifted and fell. June. The little square for the 10th was darker, as if someone had circled it. No one circled dates after a night like this, so it was marked before. Someone had an appointment with the present, a slice of time cut from the future and laid down like a blade. Samuel's hand dropped to the next doorknob. Cold metal. A thin crosswise scratch, fine as a fingernail. He left his hand there half a second, pulled back, wrote. Knob, fine scratch. Someone rushed, hand shaking. His eyes flicked to his breast pocket. The wax crackled a third time, thin as a breath. The gift, the promise, the stone. We drifted back to the parlor for air. The lamp had lost most of its halo. Dwyer, by the door, murmured with two thick-set men. You question Reverend Kent yet? No, he says he stayed at his aunt's. They say Jameson laughed at lunch, names hammered in like stakes around the house. They were building a fence out of people. And fences don't protect you from the thing inside. They only block your view. I looked at the milk again. The pink had spread a shade farther as the lamp trembled. This was the balance point for me. Amid all the lists of horrors, a single spilled glass. Everything should start there, where life was shoved off its track. In my head, a small cold sentence clicked into place. Life ended with a sound no one heard. Samuel shut his notebook, opened it again, learning to breathe. He tilted his head, listening, not to the house, but to himself. Then he walked the narrow hall toward the last door. I followed. On the right-hand wall, long streaks dragged downward, uneven, deep here, faint there. They told a story to anyone patient enough to listen. More people moved through this passage than the first count would admit. Every passerby left a beat, and none of the beats matched. At the end waited the girl's door. Across the hall, the black cloth over a mirror had slipped at one corner, like an eyelid that wouldn't close. Samuel set his palm on the knob. I stood just behind him, very close. His warmth against my wrist, though I had no wrist. Dwyer stopped at the midpoint of the corridor, unable to come closer. Outside, the crowd fell quiet by a heartbeat, as if the whole town were holding its breath for this 1 second. You don't have to. Dwyer got half a sentence out. The word look died in his throat. Samuel's fingers tightened. The knuckles went white. The pen wedged between two fingers, black and sharp like a nail. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. From his pocket came the wax paper crackle. Fourth time. Louder, like a heart knocking the ribs from the inside. I knew. Beyond this door there was nothing left for him to give except his gaze. I wanted to put my hand on his shoulder. I couldn't. All I could do was measure the short distance between the knob and the truth. One notch, one turn, one sliver of a gap. He turned the knob. Creak. The lamp shivered, and the curtain inside me fell. The shrouded mirrors. Wind scraped the window and held a long, feverish note, breathing damp through the seams like the chest of a delirious patient. The reek of moldy straw and wet earth slipped through the boards, mixing with the metallic tang that had sunk into the walls. Samuel closed his notebook and lifted his head down the hallway. In the shiver of oil light, dark cloths smothered every mirror on the walls. The house was full of mirrors, and all of them were blind. Why cover them? To erase the face, to erase the memory. I stepped back half a pace. The air thickened, not only from blood, but from order. Covered mirrors weren't panic. This was the work of a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. A signal. A right. Samuel approached the large mirror at the end of the hall. Black cloth sealed it edge to edge, the lower hem stained dark in branching veins. His hand trembled toward it, then froze. The pen came out like a drawn blade. Every mirror in the house is draped. Intent, not accident. Let no soul be reflected. His script hesitated on the last period, the ink pooling like something stuck in the throat. Behind us the crowd gathered near the doorway like fish schooling toward light. Whispers hissed. It's a sect. I've heard it. Souls pass through mirrors. Or he didn't want to see his face. Afraid his sin would cling. No, it's the devil's work. Only demons cover every mirror. Rumor always looks for a place to perch. Where it's darkest, that's where it lands. I remembered foggy files from the early 1900s. Iowa seeing night prayer circles bloom. People who believed blood could bleach the spirit. Basements. Sloppy candles. Words that weren't English. Many groups were broken up, but the rituals didn't die. They hid in homes, in night, in bells that rang offbeat. Standing here, staring at this row of blind eyes, I felt rumor nailed into the walls. Samuel dipped his head toward Sheriff Dwyer. You see it? This isn't just murder. It's ritual. Dwyer swallowed, mustache twitching. Maybe the killer didn't want anyone to catch a glimpse. It's just, his sentence broke on just. People dodge truth two ways: deny it, or rename it into something lighter. Samuel opened the book and drove the line into bone. Police fear the truth. They call ritual a coincidence. I watched his letters lean like slashes. A question rose, not in my ears, but in my bones. If this is a rite, who's the celebrant? A name flared like a match: Reverend Caleb Kent. Drifting preacher. One eye not quite true. A mouth that mumbled scripture backward. Once he admitted. Twice he recanted. A man who said someone, not human, whispered in his ear. From the crowd, a whisper too loud to be a whisper. Saw Ken in the market last week. Said blood is holy water. Said mirrors throw sin back. Another voice latched on. He was near the depot last night. No one dared ask. Rumor piled on rumor, pressing in like a clot inside this house. Samuel pushed open the master bedroom of Elias and Clara. The lamp slid across two shapes beneath blankets. Still, sealed, faces hidden. I didn't stop there. I froze at the mirror. Ornate carved frame, its face smothered with a white cloth stained brown. The blood had crept upward from the lower edge, as if a hand had slipped under the sheet to search for a face, and snatched back. Samuel stepped away. His lips moved, no sound. The pen spoke instead. Even the parents' deaths made ceremonial. No last look allowed. No reflection means no existence. Erase the image, erase the person. I leaned in, and, God help me, I heard breathing. Not Samuel's. Not mine. A thin, hidden flutter behind the cloth. Do not let the soul reflect. Do not let guilt escape. I spun. No one. Only the fabric lifting and falling like a chest, though the window was shut tight. Outside, a woman clawed the doorframe and screamed, Kent. It's him. I heard him preach. A child's blood is the purest sacrifice. The shout was smothered in frantic shushing, as if the name might summon a shadow. Samuel shut the notebook. His eyes were hollow but hard as nails. I watched him change in an instant, from broken father to hunter of truth. Grief sank into the heart to free both hands for the page. The mirror is the first door. It hides more than faces. It hides the truth. In the lamp's breath, the blood on the cloth trembled as if it were breathing. Samuel stood close, palm damp against the notebook's edge. I stared too long enough to see a thin dark shape. Maybe me, maybe not, slide behind the sheet. A flash so quick it kicked my heartbeat off the rails. Samuel wrote exactly what he felt. Thin shadow behind the cloth, sense of light's return stolen. He underlined it twice. The lines shook, as if the pen feared naming what it knew. On the porch the noise rose from murmur to growl. Names were knives now. Reverend Kent. Mirrors are gates for devils. Child blood baptizes. Fear tore off its mask. It needed a name to bite. Dwyer hurried out to calm them, his arm pitching under the lamp like a flagpole about to snap. The crowd wouldn't quiet. The storm had found its eye. A man with a wandering gaze and a mouth full of mutter. Samuel lifted the lamp to the nightstand. A thin Bible lay open mid-page, the print blurred by a red wash into a crooked cross. He touched the edge, the grit where ink met salt. He wrote, blood in God's words. Devotion or mockery? The room had no answer. The street might. In the dark, I heard a muffled prayer, the sound of words chewed in sleep. A soul reflected is a soul held. Cover it. Cover them all. I turned, only to see the cloth shiver like eyelids that wouldn't close. Samuel clenched his jaw. Kent. If he. The sentence snapped. The pen finished it with a single hard, straight stroke. He was writing an indictment without a name. A footfall touched the threshold. I looked back. A small man stood there in a faded black cassock, bent as if the wind leaned on him. His eyes shone odd in the oil light, bright without warmth. Caleb Kent. He didn't enter. He stood and moved his lips, reading scripture in a tongue I didn't want to understand. The crowd outside shouted his name, but he kept his silence. His gaze drifted over the room's corners and lingered longest on the shrouded mirror, as if he were greeting an old, familiar work. Samuel wheeled around. For a heartbeat, two men faced each other, a father with a notebook, a preacher with empty hands. No words, no steps, but the room shrank, like a lung cinched tight. Kent smiled, crooked, dry, like a crack. He turned and slid into the dark hall, moving as if pulled by his own gravity. Wind hissed in the seams like sand. Dwyer burst in, sweat stippling his brow. Don't mind him. He's sick. Unwell. It can't. His voice shook, like a man wrapping bandages round himself. Samuel didn't answer. He wrote. He smiled in the blood. This isn't his first draped mirror. The pen made a sharp little snick on the paper that raised the hair on my arms. We moved into another room. Another mirror, sealed. At the lower left corner, a single stitch had popped, leaving a pinhole. Through it, a speck of light no bigger than a needlehead. If the dead had caught that glint before the cloth came down, would their souls snag there? I leaned closer. Along the wooden frame, soot clung like the smear of a sliding hand. Heavier on the right side, slender fingers. Not the hand that swung an axe. Two people, one to cover, one to kill. Samuel saw it too. He set the nib and wrote with the tailor's certainty. Soot on right edge. Fine finger marks equals assistant. One to veil, not strike. Out in the hall, someone hammered posts for a makeshift fence. Dwyer barked until his throat rasped. Commands peeled off the walls like damp paper. In the noise, a man's voice cut hard. If Kent did it, why is he walking free? Who's keeping him that way? The answer came low and quick. Someone's paying. The right is a shell. That sentence flew into the room and nailed itself to the floor. Samuel shut the notebook. His eyes flashed dry sparks. His pain hadn't vanished. It had hardened into sight. He stepped to the largest mirror in the hall. Oak carved with curling oak leaves, the rim worn smooth where hands had polished it for years. He pinched the hem of the cloth. A long, thin breath, the kind a surgeon takes before the first cut. Wax paper rustled once in his breast pocket. The two gifts then fell still. A promise caught between ritual and truth. Lift it, or let the night do it for you. Samuel tightened two fingers and drew the cloth down an inch, then stopped. The lamplight struck a stamp-sized patch of glass. In it, a dark smear, and the ghost of reversed letters. As if a paper once pressed there had been torn away. 3 readable characters only. On. Samuel breathed in. The pen bit the page. On. Reversed imprint on mirror, paper pressed / removed. He looked up, past me, through me, at the empty air where I stood, as if confiding in an invisible partner. I narrowed my eyes. On. Jameson? Or something else. 3 blind letters. A name both clear and counterfeit. Mirrors right backward, like truth in this house. Only right when seen through a surface that flips it. Samuel let go. The cloth fell and swallowed the tiny square of light. The wind outside dropped to a drumbeat. The crowd rumbled like water behind a failing dam. The shroud over the mirror rose and fell as if it were breathing. In that cramped silence, Samuel spoke for the first time since we came inside, voice low and dry. To kill a soul, you kill its mirror first. And to kill the truth, you bury it in ritual. He set his fingers to the hem again and pulled. At that instant the lamp coughed, half dark, then a sudden flare. In the blink of black, a sleek shadow cut across the mirror, fast as a knife through mist. When the flame returned, everything was where it had been, except Samuel's breath, heavy as dragging rusted iron. His hand stalled, sweat beading. The pen slipped, struck the floor with a small sound that rang in my skull like a hammer on bone. He bent to retrieve it, letters trembling into a blood-like scrawl. In darkness, the mirror does not reflect, it holds. Not only faces, it holds guilt. The nib stabbed the paper like a helpless axe. Each word was a guardrail against the thing gnawing his mind. He wasn't only a grieving father now. He was a bound witness, shackled to the crime like me. We crossed into a narrow chamber, and my throat cinched. Chalk scrawls wobbled in white circles on the floor. Half-burned candles sat in the center, wax congealed in greasy fans. A small mirror was wrapped in a red cloth, its edges speckled with wax like seals. Samuel wrote, clipped, prayer room. Not accidental. I breathed. Old wax and blood braided into the stink of a counterfeit funeral. No doubt now, the killer had staged a rite. Not just murder. Sacrifice. Outside, the townspeople surged, voices crashing into waves. Someone screamed that kin had raised a devil's altar here. Another swore Jameson bankrolled a baptism by blood. The shouting turned to storm. I heard, under the fear, a sick pleasure. Once a town finds a name to curse, it feels safer, even as truth slips away. Samuel stared through the window, eyes going dark, and wrote, the crowd doesn't want truth. They want a scapegoat. Light splashed across a wall where an odd blood mark ran long. I stepped closer, and my heart dropped. The blood hadn't simply spattered. It had curled into 3 nested spirals, stacked one over another, a secret sign. Samuel sketched it fast, not cast off. A mark. Memory stung. Other cases, other walls. Killers writing in blood, a language meant for those who knew. The question tore through me. Here in Villisca, who can read it? And how many outside pretend they can't? The porch roared. Dwyer shouted orders, but his voice thinned to water. The crowd had slipped the leash. Amid the din, a rasping whisper. If Kent's the hand, why is he untouchable? Someone shields him. Someone pays. The words slid into the room like a blade and stuck. I saw Samuel's fist tighten, then open. The pen spoke. If the right is a mask, who profits? For a breath, the wax paper in his pocket crackled. The gifts. That tiny sound tightened the whole hallway. A promise in its wrapping, hammered into his heart with every step. He didn't open it. He wrote, gift becomes exhibit. A promise undelivered turns to guilt. I felt it. More than death itself, the gifts were welding Samuel to the bottom of this. He would dig because there was nowhere else left to go. We reached the end of the corridor. The tallest mirror loomed, its shroud gone the color of dried blood. Samuel lifted his hand, fingers jittering, and yanked. The cloth fell. The glass swallowed the lamp. And I saw, not merely darkness. In the stammering light, faces swam up by the dozen. Pale, open-mouthed, voiceless. Hollow eyes bored into us. My heart pounded wild. I wanted to turn away and couldn't. Samuel staggered back, but he didn't blink. His pen, shaking, carved. The mirror keeps many faces. Not a single night. Repeated right. A case is never alone. It's a link in a chain. Every face is a soul that's been covered. And the killer, or the town, knows it. The wind keened, dragging a tangle of whispers with it. Outside, the crowd broke like a dam, howling Kent's name, cursing Jameson, spitting at the police. Inside, the mirror kept reflecting its drowned faces. I felt the lock click. I was no longer only witness. I was confined with them. And when Samuel closed his notebook, eyes rimmed red, I knew this wasn't one crime. It was a blood right stretching across years, across generations. The 8 bodies in the Marlowe house were only a new chapter in a book that had never closed. He whispered, maybe to the gifts in his pocket. I promised. I'll find it. He clenched the pen, and the hallway shook again with wind whipping the seams. I couldn't tell where the human sounds ended and the house began. Only one rhythm remained, cold as metal, beating steady in my skull. The heartbeat of shrouded mirrors, still breathing, still keeping everything. Rights aren't invented in a single night. They're habits. The town and its rumors. Morning broke with a thin veil of mist spread across the grass like a shroud. The Marlowe house sat still as a coffin in the yard, ringed by faces drawn from every road in the county. Each brought a story, a fear, a whispered oath too sharp to say aloud. The early wind carried the smell of damp straw and chimney smoke, mixed with the rot of old wood breathing from the battered doorframe. Samuel stepped onto the porch, notebook clutched tight, eyes flickering like the last flame of a candle. I followed just behind him. No shadow, no breath, only the chill of dawn slicing my skin like the edge of a thin blade. The crowd pulled back, not out of respect, but from the instinct to avoid a man burning alive from the inside. Wives squinted under dark kerchiefs. Mill hands stood with sawdust still clinging to their sleeves. The stable watchman reeking of warm manure. They wanted close enough to catch every word, but not close enough to be implicated. Their eyes slid to Samuel's notebook like it was some charm that could summon the killer's name. or theirs, if it came to that. An old woman with silver hair and a basket of eggs leaned toward her neighbors, voice hissing through her teeth. She'd heard every mirror inside was draped, just like the sermons from the chapel by the marsh. A dead soul mustn't be reflected. If it is, the devil borrows the face to return. The words were quiet, but when they hit the ground they clanged like a stone in a copper pan. Heads snapped together. The chapel by the marsh slipped across lips like the flare of lamp oil. Touch it anywhere and it burned. A sawmill worker cut in. He'd been late coming home last night. Passed the coal yard by the tracks, swore he saw someone jump from a freight car. Dark coat, flat cap. Said he couldn't be wrong. The gaslight was strong, and his eyes sharper than his ears. The grocer's wife, burping the tang of stale coffee, piled on. The Marlows had been undercutting prices on farm tools for weeks, luring customers away. Just last Sunday, the butcher across the creek cursed loud enough to shatter his mug. Each rumor shoved against the next, the porch floor groaning under the weight. Samuel listened to all of it, never correcting, never inserting himself. He only scribbled fragments, short, jagged, like ropes straining to measure the outline of a coming storm. I watched faces shift color in the pale light. Some eyes cloudy as swamp water, hungry for a simple name to hammer to a post. Others shifty, avoiding sparks that might burn down their own thatched roofs. Beneath it all lingered the sour musk of the town, dampened faith, sweat-soaked money, pride bleeding under the skin. That stench seeped into their words, turning rumor into oath, and oaths into nooses. A young man in a buttoned shirt, neck stiff, leaned against a porch post. His voice was low, like someone who'd listened to plenty but believed little. He claimed he'd heard Reverend Caleb Kent preaching by the market last night. Blood washes away lies. Cover the mirrors so sins can't crawl back through borrowed faces. When he mouthed the phrase, children's blood, his voice broke, as though he'd spat a forbidden word. Heads turned sharply. Kent's name passed through the crowd like a needle prick, shoulders hunched, necks recoiled. One man sneered, "He's crazy." Another muttered, "Even crazy hits truth sometimes." Kent was a shadow. The more you chased him, the longer he stretched. Then Harper, county reporter, collar frayed on his jacket, slipped through the throng, smile thin as dried ink. His eyes flicked to Samuel's notebook with a professional twitch. He spoke without looking straight, voice sweet with a chill underneath. This wasn't a newsroom. People were already scared enough. Don't stir them further. His next line dropped heavy, like a stone down a well. Around here, some names cost you your job. Some words cost you sleep. Samuel lifted his head, eyes bloodshot but clear, and spoke slowly. He was writing down the names of his daughters. Harper's mouth curved, hand combing back his hair. The crowd, he said, loved nameless devils. The stranger on the midnight train was a perfect story, safe for print, safe for advertisers. His words slid off like grease, sticking nowhere, except to Samuel's eyes, which carved marks into him like a blade scoring wood. The wind shifted. A church bell somewhere struck a wrong note, bent and off-key. I noticed old men standing at the edge of the yard, fingers sliding nervously over wooden rosary beads, eyes refusing to linger on the porch. Fever spread through their breaths. The town needed a curtain, any curtain, madness, faith, devil, or stranger. Behind it, the clean-handed and perfumed would sip their noon coffee and talk about the corn yield. A rail yard watchman stumbled forward, glancing around before leaning close to Samuel's ear. He reeked faintly of cheap whiskey, words slurring. Sometime past one, a freight train paused for steam. A shadow leapt from the car, dark coat, flat cap, and strode fast toward the old church before melting into the trees. The man swore his eyes were sharp, but his voice quivered. Each word sounded like a crumb snatched from his hand by crows. Samuel pressed him, tall or short, heavy or lean. The watchman swallowed, muttered nothing certain, and drifted back into the crowd like foam carried off by current. From the far side, a harsh laugh cut out. Rail killer. Same as in Kansas, Colorado. Family after family. Now it's our turn. The crowd clutched the rumor like a life raft. Better to blame a phantom drifter than stare into each other's eyes. An old woman shook her head violently. Not the rail. It's judgment. God's hand. Cover the mirrors, cover the faces, doubt it at your peril. A small-time contractor sliced in, voice sharp as a snapped string. Judgment? Nonsense. Elias cut prices, undercut everyone. He made enemies. Every house here's got an axe. Heads turned aside instantly, as if sunlight had brushed too near their secrets. I felt the string humming beneath the village. Cheap, dead, orders, loss. Dry kernels that struck sparks when thrown together. In a town where every household owned an axe, the weapon was never the question. The question was the hand. And whose hand was it? A stranger blown in on the train, or someone who shared bread and gossip at the market stalls? Samuel moved down the porch, his gaze sweeping lowered faces. He asked a sweating man in too clean a collar whether Elias owed anyone. The man fumbled as though choking on a corn husk, muttering about late payments, rubbing the edge of his shirt as if scrubbing away a stain. Samuel's pen scratched it down. Debt, delay, ledger, discount, leaving a long blank space, the silence between two waves of pain. Then a local official stepped forward, armband knit, voice oiled from practice in front of a mirror. The people needed order, no more agitation. Let the proper authorities handle this. He tilted his head toward the church steeple, hinting where to send their fear. Samuel looked at him, not frowning, not smiling, just asking, "And what do you want me to write?" The man's toothless grin spread. "Write peace. Write comfort." His answer laid a white cloth over a bleeding wound. Hands worried hat brims. Eyes fixed on the dirt. Feet shuffled heavy. Rumor was a beast with many heads, each speaking in a different voice, dragging the village body toward the pit where truth lay buried. In my mind, fragments began knotting together. Mirrors covered. Chapel. Kent. Cheap prices. Debts. Warehouse. Train yard. Shadow. Tracks. 3 roads, all converging on one unseen knot. I felt wires straining, waiting for a hand to yank them tight. Harper returned, this time with the look of a man who'd eaten his breakfast. He slipped Samuel a scrap of smudged paper, his gesture casual as tossing kindling. A telegram had gone out to the county seat the night before the murders. He heard 2 words clearly, accountant and finished. No names attached. Around here, names in print could cost jobs, he warned, flashing a stage wink. Samuel stared at the slip like a fish writhing out of grip. He asked who sent it. Harper shrugged, lit a thin cigarette, smoke curling across his hat brim. He lived on words, but wouldn't die for them. I knew Samuel heard it the same way I did. Accountant in the middle of 8 bodies hacked down wasn't innocent. It smelled of stale ink, damp ledgers, locked safes. That word always traveled with another, a name the crowd wouldn't say aloud. The name of a man who could knock on any door without knocking. At the gate, a black-veiled widow stood half in, half out. Her face was a pond thick with mud. She didn't look Samuel in the eye, just tilted her head enough for her whisper to fall. "Don't write his name. The wind carries here. Franklin Jameson doesn't like mirrors. Not since the books went missing." She turned and left, dissolving into the throng like smoke. A shiver swept the yard. Some crossed themselves, some shuffled, some bent for stones. Jameson's name hit the ground heavier than lead shot. It rippled across faces. Fear, recognition, danger. Harper flicked his ash too fast. Sparks singed his shoe. Sheriff Dwyer stared skyward, clouds blank as excuses. Silence wrapped the crowd like a burial shroud. I understood why the name turned faces pale. Jameson was a windowless room in the town's imagination. Step inside, and it was all dark. People preferred telling stories about devils on trains rather than naming the man who lived 2 streets away, the man with keys to ledgers and safes. A faceless devil was easy to curse. A man with many faces was dangerous to name. The crowd exhaled in relief once they split their fear in 2. Half thrown onto the rail killer, the other half swallowed when they heard Jameson. Samuel lifted his head, his eyes strangely calm, like a pond after the wind. He opened his notebook, writing slowly, carefully, as if carving into stone. Telegram. Accountant. Night before. Jameson? Then he looked out across the crowd, not searching for one man, but measuring the whole forest of faces. I felt the town's shudder crawl down my spine. They wanted to flee from the question, but their boots were stuck in the mud of their own stories. Some turned away, some smiled thinly, Some crossed themselves, some silently checked their own ledgers for stains. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of the marsh. The church bell tolled again, one note off key. The porch felt narrower, the faces too close. In their blinking eyes I saw more than rumor. Calculation, resentment, debt, shame. A great crime was like a kettle lifted from the fire. The steam rose and revealed what had been boiling underneath. Samuel closed the notebook, breath heavy but silent. He stepped back inside, boots tracking the wet earth. I followed close, while behind us the porch broke into fresh whispers, fizzing like rain on dry ground. In a place where everyone was tied to everyone else by thin cords of kinship, 8 corpses weren't just a murder. They were a mirror, reflecting a community drowning itself in its own dirty water. And now, with a widow whispering, "Don't write his name," that mirror had found its first reflection. Inside, light sliced into narrow strips across the floor. The smell of last night's blood still hung there, like a sick animal. Samuel set his hand on the same doorframe where he had trembled hours before. His voice came low, almost to himself, but nailed into the wood. "Write it down, for them. Write for the children." I knew those words weren't only for his daughters. They were for a whole town trying to sleep through daylight. A wagon clattered into the yard, wheels sinking half a turn into the mud. The driver glanced at the house, eyes lowered, then tugged his horse back. The crowd swelled and thinned like breath. No one wanted to be the first to leave. No one wanted to be the last to stay. They all waited for an excuse. A bell, a name, or a crow. No bell. The name had just been swallowed. The crow had been roosting on the eaves all along. I saw it shift its feet, head tilted down like a question mark with no answer. And in my chest, that question fell like hail. If a whisper could chill a crowd to the bone, what could a notebook do? And if sleeplessness stretched too long, what might they do to the man holding the pen? The sky lightened. Someone tripped on the porch step, cursed, then laughed thinly at himself. I looked back one last time. Some faces still tried to wear nonchalance, a kind that shatters like uncovered glass. Inside, the mirrors lay swaddled, waiting for a hand to tear the cloth again. And I wondered, when the fabric is pulled, who will the glass show first? The killer, the paymaster, or the town itself? Then, like a loose thread tugged from a shroud, I heard it, soft, a woman's whisper at my back. "Don't say his name. The wind carries here." The morning breeze gusted through the porch, the stink of swamp lifting strong, and that whisper cinched itself around every throat like a tightening ribbon. I turned with Samuel into the house, leaving behind a yard full of people practicing how to speak softer than their own breath. In the Marlowe kitchen, daylight leaked through the shutters, striking the dried blood crusting the boards. Samuel sat at the table, notebook open, his pen slashing the silence outside into lines of ink. I stood over his shoulder, feeling every tremor in his thin wrist as he tried to weld scattered rumors into testimony. Outside, the crowd swelled again. The massacre had become a carnival, drawing more villagers as if the house itself was a grotesque fairground. Voices tangled, truth indistinguishable from invention. Some swore Kent had been near the tracks last night. Others claimed he was only a puppet, that the real hand wore gloves of money. One man muttered that Marlowe's ledgers had gone missing the night before. That word, ledgers, caught like a spark in dry hay. The crowd stirred harder. This was no longer just a tale of blood. It was a tale of debts, records, and pride. Samuel braced his elbows on the table, eyes set on the porch. He heard it all. In his mind, the words locked together. Covered mirrors, Kent, rail yard, cheap tools, debts, books. His pen gouged the page, 8 dead. One ritual, one hidden hand, one missing ledger. The letters dug grooves like epitaphs on stone. Then Harper slipped back again, his smirk gone, face taut like a man who'd heard what he dared not print. He leaned close to Samuel, whispering. Another thing, a telegram sent to the county seat the night before. 2 words, accountant and finished. "Don't put my name on it, you hear?" Then he pulled away like a rat retreating to its hole. Samuel's eyes narrowed. I felt it too. The sound of a stake hammered into wet ground, a marker to hang guilt upon. The yard stretched tight as a drum. The black-veiled widow stepped forward, slow, face hidden. She whispered only for Samuel, "Don't write his name. Franklin Jameson doesn't like mirrors, especially since the books went missing." Then she turned and was gone, smoke into the crowd. Silence dropped. People lowered their eyes. Some crossed themselves. Some faked coughs. Jameson's name lay heavier than lead. Sheriff Dwyer leaned against the porch beam, pretending to study the sky. He'd heard it. Chose silence. Silence was complicity. No one wanted to mouth that name. To say it was to draw the blade against one's own throat. But silence didn't erase it. Silence made it grow. Samuel shut his notebook, but his gaze stayed on the crowd. His eyes traveled face to face, pausing longest on the ones that looked away. He knew. The axe might have swung in one man's hand, but to bring it down on 8 souls, a whole town had to turn its face. And when a widow whispered Jameson's name, the truth had pushed its first blade of grass through the mud, no matter how hard they stamped. I felt it too. The question was no longer who swung the axe, but who opened the door and who buried the trail. This house was not just a crime scene. It was a mirror reflecting the rot of an entire town. The horror wasn't the 8 bodies alone. It was the scramble to shove the darkness onto someone else to keep their own hands clean. Samuel wrote one final line, letters tall and straight, carved like a verdict. Not the rail killer. Not madness. A familiar hand. Money. He closed the book, breath ragged but eyes burning bright. I knew he wouldn't stop. He would dig deeper, even if the town tried to bury him alive. And me, chained to his shadow, I would have to watch it all. Outside, the church bell rang once more. But in its warped tone, I heard no prayer, only a warning. Touch the truth, and the bell won't save you. The confession. Evening dripped down slow, thick as syrup. On the Marlowe roof, the last light of day faded into a sickly yellow that clung to the damp wood. The front yard never emptied. People had grown used to standing there, as if watching a play without knowing which act was real. Words fell like pebbles in a porcelain basin. Rail killer, covered mirrors, missing ledgers, debts. Each phrase was tinder for half the town. Samuel stood by the porch post, notebook clenched in his hand like a stake holding up a collapsing wall. I stayed close behind him, smelling the swamp rot rising from the kitchen drain, watching a single fly drift lazily along the doorway before vanishing into shadow. When the sun kissed the tree line, the crowd split open as if cut by an invisible blade. A figure hobbled in from the dirt road, a small man, hunched, in a black robe worn to gray, the hem dragging dust behind him. He looked frail, yet the air tightened around him like a noose wherever he stepped. No one spoke his name. They only shuffled aside, letting that shadow slide into the yard like a fish breaking the mud surface. I saw his eyes before his face, 2 weak flames, guttering like candle stubs. Sweat dripped from his hairline, staining the collar of his dingy white shirt like spilled milk. He stopped at the porch, staring into the doorway where the smell of blood still lay, like a wounded beast refusing to die. The crowd froze. A child whimpered once, then fell silent. I heard Samuel's shoe tap the wood. His storm had gone still, like a calm lake moments before it shatters. The man opened his mouth. His voice was high, laced with a fake sweetness, like burnt sugar smoke. Each word carried the faint odor of old church candles. I saw blood, he said. I heard the axe sing. God told me, do it. A cold ripple slid across the yard, up every spine, rooting itself at the nape. A hat slipped from someone's hand. Another crossed himself without thinking. Faces turned to one another, searching their neighbors for permission to believe. Then a man's dry sawdust voice cracked the silence. What did he say? And the whisper spread like a cracked bowl breaking. He confessed. Samuel stepped one stair closer, eyes fixed, steady as a knife at a throat. He didn't shout. He only asked, level, cutting, "It was you?" The man smiled. Not joy, habit. His mouth twisted left, lips dry, teeth yellowed. I held the axe, he said slowly, like a schoolboy reciting. I brought it down. 8 souls released. The yard erupted. Shouts broke like a flock of blackbirds. Grab him. Devil in a hat. God save us. Someone lunged, yanked back by another's arm. Names spat like buckshot, hitting no one but rattling everyone. A woman stumbled, clutching her skirt, collapsing at the yard's edge, burying her face in her sleeve. Her sobs strangled instantly, as if she feared even her grief might be called as witness. Sheriff Dwyer shook off his usual stupor and pushed forward. But he drew no cuffs, spread no arms. He raised his hands like a preacher calming his flock. "For God's sake, be still. Reverend, hush now. Hush." From a badge holder, the word carried less weight than ash. The black-robed man tilted his head, savoring the chaos like a magician admiring his flock of doves. He breathed out with a shuddering satisfaction, the long sigh of a man releasing gas from a tight belly. Samuel didn't move. He cut the air with one question, sharp and precise. "Why the mirrors? Why cover their faces?" The man shut his eyes, lips twitching. Then he giggled, a child's chuckle hiding candy in a sleeve. "So the souls wouldn't wander," he said. "So they'd look at God, not me." A young man spat, half leaping toward him. His shoulder was yanked back so hard the joint popped, sending him crashing into the porch post. He slid down, clutching his arm, eyes blazing with rage and helplessness. The crowd buzzed like a nest of termites. Many muttered to themselves, "He's mad. He's sick. He can't be trusted." But the relief was thin, a blanket over frost. Because if he was mad, why did every detail fit like teeth in a saw? The black-robed man lifted his eyes to the dark doorway, as if he saw the shapes of 8 bodies trembling under sheets. He tilted his ear, listening to music only he could hear. Then his tone shifted. The shrillness softened, pressed low, like wind slipping through cracks. "No," he whispered. "I didn't do it. I saw. I dreamed. Every night I dream. Last night I dreamed blood. I dreamed mirrors. But it was a dream." The words floated like a silk ribbon. The crowd grabbed it instantly. "See, he's mad. Dreaming, that's all." The storm, ready to break, found a detour. Faces loosened. Sheriff even let slip a smile, thin as a thread. The smile of a man who'd just sidestepped a cliff. Samuel climbed one more step. The porch creaked under his shoe. His voice was flat, precise. "If it was just a dream, how do you know there were 8? How do you know about the mirrors?" A bead of sweat carved down the man's temple. For the first time, he hit the wall of their eyes, with no crack to slip through. His swallow rippled under his skin like a pebble under cloth. Because I stood at the door," he blurted. I heard every blow. Every blow." The words landed like an axe head in the dirt. Someone clutched his skull. Another buckled to his knees. Samuel's nails bit into his notebook, whitening his fingers. Breath across the yard dropped a degree. The man had cut through his own lifeline. Dreams could be dismissed, but standing at the door was a noose. Sheriff lunged again, voice suddenly booming, borrowed from a throat braver than his own. "Enough. He's sick. His words won't stand." Everyone calmed down. His hand landed on the man's shoulder, not to restrain, but to soothe, and nudged him aside, turning him to face the crowd's safer backs. The villagers said nothing. They were practiced in letting the wind carry dangerous words. Reverend Kent eased back half a step, his crooked mouth stretching into a weary grin. He'd found his mud again, the place to sink, half holy, half filthy. Mad enough to dismiss, mysterious enough to fear. A figure too dirty to embrace, too sacred to discard. From inside the house came a faint metallic clink, maybe a spoon on wood, maybe a nail slipping from a beam. Small, but it echoed hollow, like ribs struck from within. The house groaned, exhausted, forced to stand as a monument to whispers. At the yard's edge, a man in a flat cap, cheekbones sharp, who had stayed silent all day, twitched as if bitten. He stepped forward, cold dust clinging to his clothes. He began, uncertain as a man in new boots. "Last night, by the rail yard, I saw someone jump from a freight car." Samuel's head snapped up, strings pulled tight. 100 eyes followed. "You saw him clear?" he asked, voice brittle as paper. "Dark coat," the man said. Cap pulled low, headed fast toward the old church. Never looked back. The words dropped like stones into the mud, striking the town's deepest vein. Rail killer, stranger, train, shadow. A sigh of relief exhaled through the crowd, long as if after a steep climb. They had their out. A stranger was the softest pillow for conscience. You could hate him without fear of his return, talk of him without tangling in family ties. Kent knew it too. I caught the flicker in his eyes, a rat darting across a threshing floor. He shrank behind the sheriff, curling small and pitiful, pitted but spared. He had shoved the axe's shadow onto another, an unnamed man stepping off a train. Samuel's gaze clung to the flat-capped man, wanting to tether him with questions, with ink, with anything. But the man's mouth snapped shut like an old leather wallet. He dabbed sweat from his brow, nodded once, and slipped away, his narrow shoulders blending into the crowd like reeds back into the marsh. The yard sighed again. No one stopped him. Everyone was glad to hand their terror to a stranger who could vanish. Wind shifted, carrying the smell of ripe mud from the swamp. A church bell struck wrong again, mocking. The sky turned from jaundiced gold to a sick gray-green. Faces blurred, shuddered. No one raised their voice. Words folded inward, hidden like pocket knives. Samuel opened his book. The pen hovered, then struck 3 words, big and black: the railman. He pressed his finger to the page, holding the words down like a trapped insect. I felt his breath beat double. Grief learning to stand, mind forging a hook to drag truth back from the swamp. The black-robed preacher vanished into the crowd's edge. Sheriff adjusted his tarnished badge, staring upward as if waiting for rain to rinse it all away. Feet shuffled. Men twisted wedding rings. Evening fell another notch. A crow flapped from the eaves, ink smeared across the sky. I stood behind Samuel, watching his back bend inward as if pressed by unseen hands. He drew in a breath that carried blood stink from inside the house and swamp stink from outside, mixing into an air thick enough to choke. My heart beat to the rhythm of a train we could not see. Heavy, steady, endless. Tonight, we'd heard a confession hit the ground like stone, only to be pocketed under the word dream. Tonight, we'd watched a stranger's shadow take up the torch, running it away from names everyone knew too well. The axe's blade hadn't traveled on any train. It was here, leaning in the Marlowe kitchen like a signature no one dared erase. Samuel shut his book with a clap like a door slammed by wind. He turned inside. I followed, leaving behind the tramp of feet dispersing like an audience after a play that never named its lead. In the dark kitchen, the axe still stood against the wall, brazen as an unwashed truth. The oil lamp's flame quivered on its edge, making the steel blink like a restless eye. I knew the next act wouldn't play out on this porch. It would move to the rail yard, the telegraph office, the places where words raced faster than blood could dry. And if a man had jumped from that car, what trace did he leave in the cold dust? Which way did he walk? Or was that sighting just chalk lines, drawn to comfort the town into sleep? From afar, a train whistle cut through the night, a blunt knife slashing silence. Beneath it, I heard the ghost of a name, the same name whispered by a widow at dawn, then swallowed whole. The name lay heavy as lead under every tongue in town. Everyone felt it with their teeth. No one dared spit it out. Samuel braced his hand on the table, fingers dusted with wood grit. He whispered low, "For me alone, write it again. For the children, write what they swallowed." His shoulders trembled. Mine locked tight. The lamp guttered, flame-licking wick. And I knew. We would follow that whistle, whether it led to a faceless stranger on the tracks or back to polished shoes in a house with clean windows. There was no room left for dreams. Only for dried blood, oil paper, and ink. Night clamped down on Villisca like a damp shroud, smothering breath. The Marlowe house hunched in the dark, for walls steeped in old blood. Samuel lit the lamp again, its yellow glow crawling over stains like roots on a grave. The town might call it the rail killer. They might sleep under that mask. But the axe hadn't moved, and Samuel still held the pen. His shadow stretched long, merging with the axe's shadow, forming a twisted shape, man and weapon fused. The image the whole town feared most, truth itself, holding the blade, waiting for someone to name it. Small evidence. By morning the mist wasn't white anymore. It had turned the color of cold ash, pasted to the roof tiles and porch steps like a thin kiln dust. The Marlowe house was empty. The gawkers had grown bored, the frightened kept their distance, and the busy tongues had rasped themselves hoarse. In the quiet, the blood smell returned, clear and cold, a voice that had been buried under talk all day. Metal, mildew, old wood. Samuel pushed the kitchen door. A thin blade of light slid across the floor, and we started over, from wood, cloth, iron, and dirt, not rumor. The axe still stood in the corner, the steel chin drooped like a spent animal. No one had taken it. No one had covered it, brazen as a signature left on purpose. Samuel didn't touch it yet. He stood a step away, eyes sweeping from the butt to the blade, and back to the grip. The handle held a whole history. Parallel scuffs from dragging through oak bark, old nicks where it had rested on a crate nail, silvery scratches worn smooth by sweat. A palm's breadth below the head, the wood was polished to a shine, the spot a worker's hand lived. This weapon had a long life in this kitchen. The axe hadn't wandered. Hands rarely do. Samuel wrote. Axe familiar, polished grip, parallel work scars, belongs to the house. I leaned in. Damp wood and fine, chalky blood. Along the blade's edge clung a single dark fiber, no thicker than a hair, but kinked, cotton fluff, likely from a shroud or pillow tape. No magnifier. I burned my eyes memorizing the curl of it. Samuel pressed his pen deep. The ink set like a nail, dark cotton fiber on edge. The supper table sat half-lit. A thin fingernail track ran straight along the rim. Someone idly scoring wood while waiting. 2 cups of milk, one spilled, one with a filmed ring. Bread gone stiff. At the table's lip, in the floured dust and ash, a cleaner circle, as if a cloth or lamp base had been set down and lifted. Clean inside dirty is a kind of confession. The innocent don't wipe the exact spot. Samuel flicked his fingers to measure the diameter and wrote, clean ring, placement for cloth/lamp. The kitchen drawer slid out. Paring knives and cleavers jumbled together. The meat cleaver with the smooth handle, the one I'd clocked yesterday, now showed faint brown veining on the blade, the pattern of a quick wipe with rough cloth. Near the spine, 2 tiny bites where metal had met hard bone. Cow or hog, not human. The ordinary life still stuck to it before last night turned it strange. Samuel set it back exactly where it had been, a calm movement that baited the kitchen's own memory. The white cloth from yesterday, once bald, lay pressed flat. The thread color on the seam didn't match. The stitching was rushed, spacing uneven, one corner recently patched. Beyond the brown bloom of blood, a pale circle exactly the size of a lamp's base stained the cloth. Mirrors hide the dead, lamps hide the living. Samuel placed a finger in the ring as if to track the fire's orbit, then wrote, odd cloth, fresh stitch, used to veil face/prop lamp. Ring equals lamp base. Where was the lamp during the killing? We hunted lamps. One sat on the hutch, wick charred, more than half a reservoir left. Smoke filmed the chimney unevenly, one side black, the other only hazed. Sign of a lamp kept pointed for a long while, likely at bed or door. Another lamp lay on its side under the cabinet, chimney hairline cracked. A strand of fine fabric snagged on the rim, the same kind of fiber as the shrouds. I flipped the cap, hinge smooth, while used by the household. The wick set a tad long, yet the glass wasn't fully smudged. Someone used to trimming had kept the flame modest. On a shirt sleeve hanging near the door, a faint soot swipe sat where a right-handed person would carry a lamp low. Samuel swung the light and jotted, lamp directed, practiced hand, soot on right cuff. The wash basin, an enamel bowl set askew, a skin of cloudy water with freckles of pink. Someone washed something, hands, or an axe. On the wood lip, a clean arc like a crescent, the pattern of a rag swiped over and over, then abandoned. The motion went outside in and stopped at the rim, exactly how you wipe away prints, not flour. Someone knew what they'd touched. Samuel lifted the rag from its hook. Fat, cheap soap, and the stale tang of blood. He wrote, wipe attempted, unfinished, erasing prints. Back door to the yard. Bolt set from inside. The groove in the wood angled one way. Pushed, not pulled, slanted like a right-handed rush. Down by the hinge, fresh pale splintering, something had been levered through. Outside the stoop the mud was trampled, but right at the grass edge 2 long, narrow parallel slides, drag marks from a weight. At their margin a single black, shiny grit sat wedged, coal dust, not garden soil, the kind that settles around freight cars. Samuel closed his eyes and cheated the marsh wind. The drag rut's mud had skinned over, a night's disturbance, now drying. He wrote, drag path, last night, fine coal, yard. Front room, blood spatter fanned at chest height. At the edge of the fan a chain of separated droplets, swing from high to back cut, the rhythm of a right-handed strike from the bed's flank. Near the ceiling joist, one browned at the size of a pinhead, the last tired bead. I didn't pass judgment, I only counted beats. The mirrors stayed shrouded. One cloth's hem gaped, a breath hole. Through it, only the lamp bent and warped. The frame's dust lay thick except where 2 fingers had tapped recently. Right and left, someone had handled it. Samuel touched the edge. A splinter stung his finger and a red bead rose. His drop lost instantly in the crowd from last night. He pressed his lips, dabbed the cut to the margin of his page like an accidental seal, and wrote, "Recent touch. Purpose?" Tugged the cloth/tested glass. In the children's room, we didn't lift cloth. Samuel stood still, then backed away, practicing the swallow of a name he couldn't call anymore. On the pillow by the door, a diagonal crease showed a head half-turned and then set back under the shroud. On the rug, a faint knee print. Someone heavy knelt to block. A whiff of oil hung in the air, not this household's brand. Lighter, foreign, the same trace I'd caught on a neighbor's collar when he stood on the porch yesterday. I locked the scent in my head like a frequency. The narrow stairs sang in different notes. The 4th step from the top cupped slightly, the place where someone always paused to call down to the kitchen, worn like a rim touched by the same lips. On the landing, soot feathered the lower window sash in a bird's wing. Someone had lit a candle here and waved smoke with a hand. I pictured a figure leaning against the door, candlelight licking their eyes, a makeshift celebrant. Habit is time's fingerprint. Elias and Clara's door sat ajar. The lock plate bore a faint sideways scrape, the fumbling of a hurried hand. On the wall opposite, at a grown person's hip, a long dark smear more than a hand and a half. Blunt at one end, thinned at the other, the push of a body. 2 steps from there to the bed. I didn't see it with my eyes. I smelled it in wood and sweat and breath trapped in the grain. Back in the kitchen, Samuel knelt level with the axe handle, reading the wood's pores. "This one knows lamps," he said softly, speaking to the timber. "Knows the axe. Knows which step complains, which door needs a shove, where the basin sits crooked. A stranger doesn't know those things." He wrote a short, heavy line. Marks of familiarity. I agreed without a nod. Drifters leave patterns, but here the pattern was braided into habit. Lamp turned the right way, cloth placed just so, axe set back at its old angle. Either the killer lived here, came often, or used to belong to this kitchen before leaving and coming back for one last night. On the apron hanging by the door, the inside panel held a little hand-sewn pocket, the kind for pins or coin. It gaped empty. In the mouth of the pocket, a deep green thread snagged, wrong color for the cloth repairs. Samuel teased it free and sealed it to the page with a dot of lamp wax. A strand thin as breath, but it tied kitchen to person. He closed the notebook to rest the nib, not because there was nothing left to write. "Enough to begin," he said, eyes fixed on the sill. A few figures loitered outside. Among them stood the broad-shouldered neighbor in a clean white shirt, the one who told Samuel not to play sheriff last night. Now he stood like a boundary post, too clean, staring at the house as if it had thrown the knife he hid behind his back. Samuel tucked the book into his leather bag and walked straight onto the porch, a question honed like a blade already at his tongue. "You know my house's axe, and you know my house's lamps. What time did you go to sleep?" The smile he'd practiced in a mirror cracked in half. He stretched the vowel like rubber. "Last night, my dog barked." His fingernails bit the rail, leaving white dents. The church bell in the distance missed its note again. Samuel didn't move. "What time did it bark? What time did you trim the lamp? Which hand do you favor?" 3 thrusts. He swallowed. Silence did the answering. When he shifted his shoulders, the inside of his wrist flashed. A deep green thread snagged under the button, the exact color Samuel had waxed to the page. So small you could miss it, unless you'd learned how to see small things. Samuel glanced down, then up, his gaze changing shade. "Nice stitching," he said lightly, as if complimenting a hem. The man snatched his cuff, ripping the thread free. Just 1 strand. Enough to stitch a lie shut. The yard's few onlookers shivered. A dry laugh cracked. No joy in it, only the warding off of fear. "Let the dog testify," someone muttered, then swallowed the words. Samuel flipped to the page with the lamp ring and tapped the nib 3 times on placed lamp. The thin talk reached every ear like a hammer on a coffin lid. Sweat beaded down the neighbor's temple and bled into the collar of that too clean shirt. Clean never holds up well in swamp mud. "Which lamp?" he rasped. Samuel didn't answer. He met the man's eyes, then slid his gaze to the cuff where the soot had already spoken. The man's fingers twitched to stuff his hand into his pocket, then stopped. The hitch said more than any speech. Field wind pulled a faint coal scent from the rail yard, thin as an alibi. From that direction, a whistle carved one long line, slicing morning like a dull knife through cloth. Another road for the story to run. But here, on this porch, a green thread-tied kitchen to wrist, a coal-speck-tied yard to rail, a soot-smear-tied lamp to right sleeve, a clean circle-tied cloth to lamp. The small things had shown their faces. Samuel stooped, picked up the green thread, and waxed it into the book. He didn't look at the man again. He looked down the street toward the sign that read telegraph office. Telegrams don't lie. Neither does coal. He closed the book, voice even. Post office first. Then the yard. We dropped off the steps. Wet air slapped our faces. Behind us, the house breathed, very faintly. The axe in the corner kept its head bowed, faking sleep. On the porch lip, the whispers began to roll again like gravel. It's just a single thread. Yes, a thread. But it had already sewn two worlds together, the dead and the living. At the end of the street, the post office was still shut. Dust filmed the window and threw back a colorless sky. Samuel patted his breast pocket. The waxed paper around the gifts crackled. An old promise rubbing up against a new name. I walked shoulder to shoulder with him. The clean spot in the grime. The quiet in the noise. That's where truth breathes. And this morning, truth was breathing in kerosene, coal dust, and a green thread pressed under wax. Light faint, but sturdier than the shouts of a whole town. The mist thinned, leaving narrow bands of light through the gray. Samuel snapped the book shut and slipped it into his bag, stepping through the gate. I stayed close. On the porch, a single green filament still clung, a pinprick for the eye. The neighbor slid deeper into shadow, both hands jammed in his pockets, as if he could hide fear and fact together. Post office first, Samuel said low. Not an order, not a suggestion, a line already written. The road to the post office ran along a peeling white fence. Underfoot, mud mixed with straw, dragging into long streaks like diluted ink. I walked behind Samuel, hearing the dry, determined rasp of his notebook against his coat, like a slow knife on a whetstone. The post office sat at the crossroads, a low-roofed wooden box with weathered plaster. The door stood ajar. The air smelled of ink and old paper. Mrs. Clark, the thin woman who kept the place, scarf at her throat in summer, looked up as Samuel stepped in. Her eyes dropped at once. Her hand tugged the scarf tighter, as if to keep a draft from finding her neck. "Any telegrams sent the night before last?" Samuel asked, voice hoarse and straight. "Which night, sir?" She blinked, fingers tapping the counter. "The night 8 people were killed. Before dawn, a wire to the county seat." For a moment, the tendons in her neck tightened like fiddle strings. Then she bent to rummage a drawer. Oiled papers, blotched with ink, lay stacked in a skewed pile, but Samuel was faster. He stopped her hand and drew out a smudged slip. 3 words were still legible. "Accountant finished." Mrs. Clark tugged back, but Samuel held the page, his eyes kindling. "Who sent it?" She bit her lip till it bled. The name, blurred. "I'm not sure. A man with a hat, very late. Spoke softly. Paid extra, said to keep the change." "Signature." She shook her head. "Only a long dash. I figured he was drunk." Samuel scribbled, "Night of the 10th. Wire reads accountant, finished. Mail sender, broad brim hat. Overpays, refuses change." His shoulders went rigid. 1 telegram, and a knife slid straight into Truth's ribs. This wasn't just frenzy. It had planning, arithmetic, money. We left the post office for the rail yard. The tracks glinted weakly, running off into the blur. Coal rose in black mounts, smoke stink clinging to everything. A hunched yardman was working a shovel, face smeared with soot. Samuel asked cleanly, "Did anyone jump off a train last night?" The man lifted his head, eyes glittering from hollows. "Yeah, around 1. Coal train stopped for water. Saw a dark shape drop, coat and cap, and run toward the old church. Tall or short, heavy or light?" Samuel pressed. The yardman swallowed. "Can't say. Smoke was thick, but the stride was quick, steady, like he knew the way." "You see his face?" "No. Just remember, hard heels on the bridge planks." Samuel jotted, then crouched near the coal pile. There they were, faint shoe prints with the inner edge biting deeper than the outer. A man in stiff, newer soles. Mud mixed with coal, drying into a dead black crust. He eased a penknife under a flake, lifted it, and tucked it into the book. I could see it. The town already had a tidy escape route shaped like a faceless shadow. But Samuel didn't swallow it. He wouldn't. On our way back, Harper was loitering by the platform, a cigarette ember glowing at his lip. He smirked. "Still digging," he said. "Rail killer sells papers better than a neighbor. Folks prefer devils to men." Samuel didn't answer. He opened the book and tapped the line about the green thread. Harper squinted, then snorted. "A thread? You're gonna hang a man with that?" "Believe me, a court might, but not the court of public opinion. The crowd wants one thing, a demon, a jumper off a train." Samuel shut the book, eyes rimmed red. "I don't write for the crowd. I write for my children." That sentence fell like a hammer. Harper shut up, turned away, and the smoke unraveled in the wind. By afternoon, Samuel was back at the Marlowe porch. The neighbor still stood there, face flat, hands buried in his pockets. Samuel walked straight up, steady. He stopped half an arm's length away, opened the book, and pointed to green thread. "You know my house is Axe," he said, voice low, "and my house is lamps." That night, which hand held the lamp? The man flinched, eyes hunting for something to latch onto. But the faces around the yard had already turned aside, as if his gaze were a spark. Sweat threaded down his temple into the collar of that too-clean shirt. "I was home," he barked. "My dog can testify." A thin, humorless chuckle rose from the stragglers. Samuel didn't smile. He closed the notebook, his stare gone cold as tempered steel. "Can your dog thread green cotton?" The question was a blade. The man froze, fingers jerking inside his pockets. One tiny thread had become the biggest proof in the yard. I stood behind Samuel, chilled. The small scraps, fiber, lamp soot, drag marks, were braiding into an indictment. And this town, no matter how it tried to sketch a nameless rail killer, couldn't scrub away the familiar hand in the kitchen. Samuel stepped down from the porch and wrote slowly, each word like a chisel stroke. Not just rail, not just Kent. Familiar hand, green thread, telegram, accountant, finished. The nib bit and tore the paper. He looked toward the distance, toward the station where a whistle split the air. The sound shrieked like a witness who would never stand in court. I knew then, Samuel had crossed a line. He wasn't just digging for himself anymore. He'd jabbed straight into the town's darkness. That night Villisca settled into an unnatural quiet. Not peace, more like a well with its lid hammered shut. The Marlowe kitchen lamp whispered in tiny breaths, the wick shrinking as if it trembled. Samuel sat there, thin-armed over the notebook. I hovered just behind him, feeling the dark thicken, as if even the dust wanted to hear what he'd write next. Outside, clusters still lingered. No more chaos, just whispers snaking through the window crack. "Rail killer," they said. "Surely rail killer." 3 neat words, a fresh, clean blanket. They pressed it over their mouths to smother the fear of Jameson, the suspicion of neighbors, the debts unpaid. A stranger who jumps a train absolves everyone. But if the killer is familiar, everyone is caught. Samuel heard it all. His shoulders twitched once, but his hand kept the pen chained to the page, scratching out links thin as chain. Axe familiar, lamp familiar, green thread, telegram, accountant, finished. He looked up, eyes raw from sleeplessness. The tears of a father were gone. What remained was the steel of a man stepping into a country nobody in town wanted to enter. Near midnight, the kitchen door creaked. A small figure slipped in, hooded. I thought Kent had returned. He hadn't. It was the black-veiled widow from morning, the one who'd spoken Jameson's name and vanished like smoke. She stood at the threshold, breath rattling, eyes down. "Mr. Stenner," she whispered, voice trembling like a tired string. "Don't write his name again. Mr. Jameson, he has eyes everywhere. Your pen can't save you." Samuel didn't answer at once. He pulled out a chair, pointed to it, and said softly, "I don't write to save myself. I write so no one dares forget my children." She clutched her veil, shaking. "Last night," she said, "I saw a figure. Not the rail killer. Not Kent. A man. I know his step. But I can't say it. If I do, I lose my house. I lose my life." I heard her heartbeat stutter. Samuel leaned in, tapping the pen gently on the table. His name? Her eyes flashed, but her lips only trembled. At last she bowed her head and murmured, "I can't. He pays for the church, the clinic, the school. No one stands against that. He's like a shadow on the wall. Even if you tear down the cloth, you'll only see your own face shaking." She sobbed without tears, then turned and melted into the dark. Her footsteps died in the yard, leaving a strip of cold behind. Samuel sat without moving. Then he carved a short line. Witness afraid. Name withheld. Familiar shadow. Powerful shadow. From the window, a train screamed toward the night. It cut me like a blade. Samuel stepped onto the porch, eyes fixed on the swallowed tracks. "If someone jumped that car," he said under his breath. "Where did he go? The church? Or Jameson's house?" The words hit like a stone in a pond. I shivered. If that question reached the town's ears, it would paint a target on Samuel's back. Right then a man's voice spoke from the trees. Not loud, but sharp. "That's enough, Mr. Stenner." Sheriff Dwyer stepped out, tall, badge winking dull in the dark, eyes unlit. "You're digging too deep," he said evenly. "Rail killer is the only answer this town can bear. Print something else, and you'll dig your own grave." Samuel didn't blink. He raised the book, opened to green thread, and held it up. "I write the truth. Not to sell papers. Not to sing people to sleep. I write for my children. If the truth keeps someone awake, that's good." Dwyer glanced at the page, turned away, and left a single, clipped line behind. "A man killed 8 people in one night. How long do you think you stand with a pen?" His footsteps faded. Samuel went back in, hand clenched white. Political fault lines. Business feuds. Noon poured over Villisca like a white blade. June's sun so harsh it seemed you could knock on the heat with your knuckles, yet it didn't warm the town. It only stripped it bare. Tense faces behind half-closed windows, curtains yanked down like frightened eyelids, little clusters at the market whispering, then looking away when footsteps passed. Samuel moved slowly along the main street, the notebook in his leather bag pressing his chest like a heated stone. 2 days of nothing but noise, shrouded mirrors, Kent confessing then recanting, a shadow jumping a train, the green thread. But this morning all those stories had changed smell. No one lingered on demons or a rail killer. A single name seeped through every alley instead, Franklin Jameson. No one dared say it outright in the market. They used code. The banker, the bookkeeper, the lender. The name was a shark you never saw. No fin, no splash. But let a drop of blood touch the water, and the whole school shivered. Samuel turned into the commercial row. Faded pawn sign. Fresh paint on the hardware door. Shops shut tight at high noon. Each storefront a period in some report not yet written. He took notes with his eyes, and I saw it clearly. Whenever he passed, certain faces bent low, as if his gaze could read death straight through their skin. People feared ink more than axes. Steel voices clashed at the far end of the market, like 2 blades striking. 2 traders, a farm implements man and a grain seller, were nose to nose, and the crowd gathered around them the way flies find blood. "He's undercutting, dragging every customer to his house," the grain man barked, face flushed like he'd been drinking straight liquor. "Undercutting? That's called smart." The implement dealer snapped, slamming the counter so hard the shelving rattled. Then the name Elias Marlowe flew from their mouths and hit the crowd like a rock thrown into a chicken coop. Noise exploded. Some said Elias muscled in, others spat, greedy. A few called it shrewd business. Every voice with its own stink, thickening the air. Samuel didn't wade in. He stood at the edge, eyes cold as a winter well. He pulled the notebook and wrote fast. Marlowe disliked. Undercut implements. Rivals lost customers. Economic motive. Each word a stone dropped down a deepening hole. A woman in a black cloak knifed into the argument. Her voice rang high and clean, slicing the din. "You men forget the banker? Jameson chooses who borrows, and who dares not pay. If those books ever leak, which one of you survives?" Her words hit like hot iron on frozen ground. The crowd went quiet, not out of peace but collective downward glances. No one repeated the name. Shoes fascinated everyone. Shelves needed tidying all at once. No one wanted Jameson's reflection to catch them from the bank's polished glass. Samuel watched, his mouth flattening to a line. He wrote, "Jameson, general silence. Power equals debt plus fear." He left the market and stepped into the corner grocer. Stale coffee and musty flour punched the nose. The owner, an old woman with silver hair and pebble eyes, worried a worn cloth behind the counter. Samuel asked straight, "Do the Marlows still owe you?" She blinked, shoulders drawing in, voice a string pulled tight. "Everyone owes something, but Elias kept books tidy. I hear someone got hold of his ledger. Now no one knows where it is." She paused, dropped her voice to a ghost. "There are account books no one should find." Samuel nodded, no follow-up. He wrote, "Elias's ledger missing. Who took it?" "Jameson. Next stop, the post office." The place was thick with ink and damp paper. The clerk, thin, pale, hair stuck to his temples, stacked telegrams. Samuel asked, "The night before the killings, any wire to the county seat?" The boy flinched, scratched his head. "I don't recall," but his eyes flicked, quick and guilty, toward a locked drawer. Samuel said nothing. He didn't push. He wrote, "Telegram exists. Post office keeping it close." I watched the boy's hand tremble, sweat bead at his hairline. That silence told Samuel more than a shout. Out on the street, Harper was waiting, leaned on a lamppost, a half-smoked cigarette yellowing his fingers. When he saw Samuel, the corners of his mouth lifted, dry as old newsprint. "You're digging too deep," Harper said, a tone equal parts amused and cold. "This isn't just 8 bodies. It's politics. Who profits? Who loses their seat? Who holds the ledger? Put Jameson's name in print, and tomorrow your windows will be covered in cloth." He flicked the butt, ground it under his heel, and walked away. The smoke curled up around his shadow like a tame ghost. Samuel didn't move. His hand crushed the notebook until his knuckles bleached. Then he wrote slowly, each word chiseled. "Follow the money. Blood will follow." Heat crushed the streets. Samuel kept going, past the little saloon at the end. Inside, yeast breath and glass on wood. A drunk pointed a shaking finger at Samuel and slurred. "You know, Jameson's old clerk nearly stood trial for the books. Then, poof, gone, huh?" He laughed and hacked, liquor bubbling at his lips. The fragments pinned themselves in Samuel's mind. He wrote, "Jameson's clerk vanished. Transferred. Missing ledger equals missing life." Late afternoon tilted red as a bloodstain across the sky. Samuel walked straight to Villisca's grandest street, where red brick buildings stood like shoulders. Polished glass, gold-lettered signs, steps scrubbed to virtue. Clean, but clean the way a stain is scoured, hard enough to hide, not to heal. He stopped in front of the Villisca Bank. Tall wooden doors, brass trim trapping daylight. A bright brass plate, Franklin Jameson. Its shine almost cruel. The bank was closed, so he didn't go in. He just stood there, as if he could stare through wood and steel into the vault where certain books lay buried alive. I heard his heartbeat, heavy, even, like a mallet on a lid. A low voice at his elbow. "You shouldn't stand here long." A young man, civil service suit, round spectacles, narrow frame. He glanced around and whispered, "Some folks don't like how much you're writing, especially when you say accountant." He hurried off like a man dropping a curse. Samuel wrote, veiled threat. "Jameson." He closed the book and clipped the pen under the leather strap. Late sun poured down like molten lead, red gleam pooling on the bank's glass. He stood 2 breaths more, then turned toward City Hall. I trailed him, counting the weight in each heel strike. Not a reporter's step anymore. The gait of someone dragging a whole town on his back. At City Hall, a smaller crowd had packed tighter than the day before. Door cracked. Voices thundered from inside, rolling in waves like hammers on a table. Marlowe wrecked prices. He shook the whole county. "Don't dump it on the dead. The trouble is Jameson's debt book." "Enough. Who says that name in here?" The door rattled under fists. Samuel slid into the hallway, not the chamber, and stood just outside the crack. He listened, wrote, listened again. The pen trembled like a seismograph tracing the earth's anger. Marlowe, undercut. Jameson, debts. Wire sent night, June 10th. Chairs scraped, then a new voice. Lower, harder, dropped like a blade into wood. "That telegram is not to be mentioned. Anyone who mentions it is a traitor." Air compressed. Cold sweat smell leaked through the crack. Samuel snapped his book shut and turned away. He didn't need more. One sentence nailed the truth. The telegram existed, and men feared it more than the axe. Out on the street, the dust swirled. Harper blocked the path like he'd been waiting. No smirk this time. his face stripped bare, eyes sunk as if he hadn't slept. He shoved a folded scrap into Samuel's hand. "Don't ask where I got it," Harper rasped. "Just read." Samuel unfolded it. Pencil marks, pressed deep as though written in a shaking fit. "Telegram sent, ledger settled. No one else will speak. No signature, no sender, just words cold as stone." In my skull a metal clang rang out, the sound of a vault slamming shut. Samuel froze a beat, then folded the note into his book. His face drained pale, but his eyes burned hotter than ever. He had found the key to the maze, the missing account ledger. By the time we stepped off City Hall's stoop, shadows stretched long, swallowing the street. Straw smoke drifted on the wind, acrid in the throat. Samuel gripped the leather strap of his bag and quickened his pace. From here on, every step carried more weight. He wasn't chasing a man with an axe anymore. He was stalking the hand behind the red brick walls, the hand that wielded pen and seal. At the turn near the saloon, a figure lurked under the eaves. Thin shoulders, hat brim low. As Samuel passed, the man cleared his throat softly. A slip of paper dropped to the ground at Samuel's feet. He bent to pick it up. By the time he looked up, the figure had melted into the alley, gone like smoke sucked into night. On the paper, for words scrawled in rushed ink. "Don't trust Harper." A chill spiked my spine. Harper had been the only one bold enough to feed Samuel scraps. If he wasn't clean, then every clue Samuel clung to might already be a noose tightening at his throat. Samuel slid the slip into his book, lips pressed, jaw corded. Two flames burned in him now, one to light, one to scorch. Both fueled by the same thing, the loss of two children he could never touch again. Night fell on Villisca. Street lamps cast weak yellow, shadows bending grotesque across brick walls. Samuel walked slow, but each step landed like a nail hammered home. He didn't glance, didn't pause. I could hear his heart beat in rhythm with the words etching inside his skull. Acts too familiar. Cloth over glass. Telegram. Jameson. At the end of the street, he stopped beneath the great oak. Leaves whispered in the dark like secret tongues. He opened the book, flipped to Harper's page, then scrawled one last line, hand trembling, ink bleeding heavy. "If they killed 8 to erase one ledger, 8 won't be the end." He shut the book and lifted his gaze. A sliver of moon broke through cloud, casting pale light across his gaunt face, sharpened by resolve. And I, shadow to his shadow, understood. From this night on, Samuel wasn't just chasing a killer. He was declaring war on an entire town, one drowned in blood, in money, and in missing pages. The drifter rail killer. Morning in Villisca sank under a lead-colored fog, thick as a damp blanket thrown over the town to smother anything no one dared name. The road down to the depot reeked of old machine oil, rusted metal, and coal dust. Each time wind scraped through the yard, fine grit lifted and clung to the tongue, leaving the bitter aftertaste of expired medicine. Samuel walked ahead, tall, lean, hat pulled low. I followed like a sliver of shadow, listening to the tacks in his saws knock a steady tempo across the depot boards. Thock, 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 the measured cadence of a man pushing back against chaos. The waiting room's white paint had turned jaundiced. The timetable sign hung crooked, a few letters chipped like the teeth of an old man hoarding secrets. At the far end of the hall, the station office door stood ajar. Samuel knocked twice. The door swung open onto a hollowed face. The station man, eyes sunk, lids puffy, a dirty scarf at his neck, the smell of tobacco fused with sweat. He hadn't formed a question before Samuel spoke, voice low and flat. Night of June 10th. What did you see at the depot? The station man swallowed. The answer came out like a memorized line. There was a figure jumped off a freight. Dark coat, flat cap, ran toward the old church. It was a little too perfect. Real witnesses seldom speak in clean edges. Memory usually drags trash behind it. The oil stink, a limp on the left, a shiny button, a smoker's cough. Here, nothing but a dark figure. Samuel didn't write it down. He held the man's eyes. The fellow blinked in bursts, his thumb scraping the counter edge like he was erasing an invisible ink blot. I couldn't make his face, he added, voice cracking. I didn't dare look. Samuel opened his book, smooth recital. Script too clean, caution. He shut it and turned. "Let me see the duty log for that night," he said, almost casually. The station man shook his head fast, flustered. "Logs are at the post. I only work the floor." We stepped out onto the platform. Night moisture steamed faintly off the rails. The black steel shone like fish scales. Samuel stooped for a sharp, edged piece of coal, pinched it, sniffed it. "Fresh burn," he murmured. Train did stop. He ground the coal between two fingers, black streaking his knuckles, a darkness that clung like a lie. The cinder path out from the coal pile to the west was a sunken lane with grass bent in one direction. Samuel knelt, cheek nearly to the mud, the hem of his coat brushing the dirt. A few boot marks flashed and disappeared. Sharp toe, stiff sole. A saw, tooth edge still shows a few teeth, large size. Not a rubber work boot, not a farmer's soft shoe. Something dressed to look respectable, or a foot that knew how to travel across hard planks. He jotted, pointed toe, stiff sole, not local foot, then rose and followed the path. The old church sat swallowed in a stand of dying maples. The wooden door sagged. The hinges groaned like a feverish throat. Samuel eased it open. Mold hit full in the face, heavy as a kitchen wall never given a window. Light leaked through holes in the roof and fell in columns that turned suspended dust into slow, spinning souls unwilling to leave. Benches rotted. The lectern was split down the middle. A wooden cross hung crooked, one arm broken. On the floor, amid mottled gray ash, lay the outline of a fresh burn. The ash wasn't crushed fine. Here and there the curled edge of a half-burnt sheet lay like a butterfly wing. Samuel lifted a fragment. The black portion crumbled like honeycomb charcoal. A line of dark ink remained, SH or TH. Hard to tell, but the hand was office, trained, rigid, even, confident. Not a prayer leaflet, a working paper. "Drifters don't burn papers," Samuel said softly, answering himself. "A road, killer kills and moves on. Burning papers belongs to another hand, a hand that lives with ledgers." He circled the lectern slow. In a damp corner, a black oval stained the boards, exact footprint of a kerosene lamp base. Near it, a bright smear across the wood, a place suddenly too clean. Samuel set a fingertip to it and drew a line. The old grain rasped, but here it was slick. "Wiped," he said. Someone wiped away what they didn't want seen, ink or prints. I looked up and caught a thin swipe of soot across the window frame. The exact stroke of a hand waved through smoke to test how low the fire was. A small ritual of office folk, not of the wandering kind. Samuel stood in the nave and drew a long breath of ash and wet wood. He opened the book and wrote in a rush. Paper burned at old church. Lamp set on floor. Bright wipe mark. Soot on window lip. Office, familiar hand. We stepped onto the stoop. Far off, a freight horn drew out a long blade of sound, dull and serrated, cutting through a heavy sheet of night. Samuel looked toward the track, not exactly at it, but through it, toward a two-story script. Upper story, a shadow jumping a train. Easy to tell, easy to swallow, easy to sleep. Lower story, a town hand burning paper, wiping marks, writing in blanks. He tugged his pencil so hard it scored the page. Rail killer equals mask. Strange boot prints equals real. Paper ash equals local hand. Not acting alone. He underlined, not acting alone. The nib trembled over the ink like a shaking pulse. We looped back to the depot by another route, crossing the wooden bridge over the ditch. The planks bellied in places, squeaks chasing our heels as we went single file. Samuel stopped at a split board and pointed. A neat set of parallel scratches, stiff saws rasping the edge when somebody hurried. Down below, the soft bank held one step deeper than the rest. "Stumbled," he said. He dug 2 fingers into the earth and teased out the corner of a third-class ticket, edge singed, purple ink bled. The text was gone, but the border pattern was intact. Ticket not issued in Villisca. Passing through. He wrapped the stub in newsprint and tucked it into the book. Third class, out of town. The descent to the post office sat glued to the tracks like a persistent thought. The door stood slightly open. A bell gave a faint ting. Inside, ink, damp paper, cheap enamel paint. The young clerk, the one who'd said, "I don't remember," yesterday, looked up, saw Samuel, and immediately bent over a stack of useless forms. "I need the movement ledger for the night of June 10th, Samuel said. He didn't raise his voice, yet the sentence went down like a stone in a well. Sir, those aren't for the public." Samuel set the ticket edge on the counter. "I'm only corroborating," he said evenly. "If someone jumped a train, the book will have a scar." The clerk swallowed and glanced over his shoulder. No one. He opened a metal cabinet and pulled a thick, cord-tied ledger. Yellowed paper, green ruling faint, a practiced right, leaning hand. He traced the dates. There, June 10th. I leaned close. Lines full, arrival times, car numbers, cargo. Except for one box in special passenger/remarks. Not crossed out. Not blotted. Left blank. On purpose. Samuel didn't touch it. He tapped once on the empty cell. "Talk." The clerk jolted like he'd been shocked. "Who wrote the night shift?" Samuel asked. The young man stammered. Not me. Mr. Harris. But he was reassigned this morning. Transferred where? Don't know. Order came from above. He pointed at the ceiling. Shorthand for a level no one names. Samuel wrote. Train ledger. Blank field equals surgical cut. Recorder removed. He bent close and drew a breath over the page. The blue, black ink smelled newer than the rest of the lines. He added, back, filled later. Not night, of ink. The clerk blurted suddenly. That night, a man in a flat cap stood a long time on the steps. Didn't buy a ticket, didn't ask times. Just stood. When the horn blew, he vanished. He stopped, realizing he'd said too much. I didn't see his face. What did he smell like? Samuel asked, eyes elsewhere, as if idly. The clerk frowned, hesitated. A cheap cologne, the kind insurance salesmen wear. The words jumped out. Then he clapped a hand over his mouth, as if to reel them back in. Samuel shut the movement book and slid it back without thanks. Cheap cologne, he wrote in his own. The same note that had whispered across the children's room rug in the Marlowe house. A matching frequency. We cut through the freight yard. A knot of yardmen huddled around the water tower, shooting the breeze. They felt quiet when they saw Samuel. He didn't question them. He questioned the tower. The spout was wet, concrete pad slick with a left, to right arc. Whole direction from the night before. The freight had stopped for water. The paper trail matched. Only the blank did not. Wind hauled up the smell of mud. On a tie edge, a hairline streak of white paint clung to the wood. Hem of a dress scuffed in a sprint, or a corner of a covering cloth snagged on a spike. Samuel twisted the spike head. A thread of pale fabric peeled, friable. He slipped it into a wrap and noted, white fiber, scarf/hem. We ducked into the trackside rooming house. The common room was smoke, stained, a stew of cheap liquor and sweat. At the table, a few dockers slammed cards and rasped laughs. A whiskered man told a story like a snake. Oil pitch. You boys here? Kansas, Colorado, Missouri. Any place a rail runs, houses drop. Always an axe. Drifter comes, lights go out. I swear to God. Samuel listened, didn't argue. Got a name, he asked. The man shrugged. A name? You think he hands out calling cards? Folks call him the rail killer. Easy as that. The table burst out in laughter, which died when Samuel kept staring. He wrote, pattern, axe plus rail. Empty name equals easy blank. Then flipped out a second notebook, his clipped clippings. Cases across the Midwest, families butchered, axe left, doors drawn shut, depots within walking distance. Brittle as old crackers. Laid side by side, they became a poxed map. Outside, sky deepened to gunmetal. Samuel stood on the top step, watching the rails lance the horizon. He opened his book and filled half a page in dark block letters. Rail killer equals the weapon's story. The ledger's blank equals the storyteller's hand. Two voices. Two floors. He shut the book. Cold dust lifted, stinging his lids. At the edge of the platform, the station man for morning leaned against a post, watching. When Samuel turned, the man flinched and slid away into the dark like an eel into mud. Behind glass, I could hear words fall apart into halves. Don't mention the book. Broken syllables running for cover. We walked the tracks toward the trestle. Water below lay black with duckweed, trash snagged at the pilings. On the rail bed, a chalk slash marked an inspection, railroad hand. Next to it, a second mark, lower, shaky, the hand of someone and used to writing on wood. A letter half, formed J or T. Samuel laid his palm on it, reading grain, utterly still. Then he wiped it away, leaving nothing. Why erase? I asked myself, though I knew he couldn't hear. Because he didn't want another pair of eyes on a flicker, he'd rather only he remembered. We circled back, just as a freight screeched and groaned into motion. Steel singing on steel vibrated the chest. Hot oil wind slapped our faces. Samuel stood planted. He wasn't watching the cars. He stared into the gap between them. A strip of darkness passing. Darkness like the blank in the register, like the town's missing name. The answer lives in the empty space, he said. The horn cut. His coat tugged backward with the gust. The cars went. The rails left a rolling throne like some giant heart. When it faded, a small clack popped behind us, like a locked throne. Samuel snapped around. No one. Only the post office door easing shut. In the slit of glass, a flat cap slid past like a fish. Samuel took 3 quick strides. The door was already bolted. Inside, silence hollow as an empty safe. He gripped the brass knob until the knuckles whitened, then let go. He opened his book and wrote a line so short it looked like a blow. He's still here. Cliff for part 1 closes as the flat cap slips behind a locked door, leaving Samuel face to face with emptiness. On paper, on the platform, and in the town's shared memory. The post office door was latched from the inside. Brass caught a weak flare of late sun. Samuel tapped once, then twice. No answer. He crouched and peered through the toe gap. A thin crescent of dust had been freshly smeared into a curve, still damp with shoe sweat. Somebody had just stood there, listening for the train, listening for our steps, then slipped away. He didn't pound or call out. He tugged his hat brim lower, leaned back to angle an eye through the upper pane. The glass was thick, fogged, and smudged by a faint soot swipe, the same tone he'd seen on the church window. Repeating marks, like a signature without ink. Samuel turned away and kept moving, not giving up, only changing targets. He cut across the platform to the mint, green ticket kiosk. The ticket seller, greased hair, starched collar, was shutting his till. Spotting Samuel, he folded his hands like a man about to pray. Night of June 10th. Samuel said without pleasantry. Who worked the platform? I don't want a story. I want a name. Harris, the man blurted, then hurried to add. But he was reassigned to the Creston line this morning. His voice dropped, as if speaking of the dead. He didn't have time to clear his drawer. What was in it? Samuel asked, easy as weather. A flick of the eyes. A mouth that tried to be brave. A torn third-class stub, and a fleck of lamp wax stuck to the corner. I cleaned it. He hiccuped, smoothing his collar. Please, don't put my name in it. Samuel nodded, offering no comfort. He wrote, Harris Creston. Drawer, torn stub, lamp wax. Cleaned afterward. Then walked on. In Villisca, every spotless patch had its own kind of dirt. We ducked into the shade of an empty storehouse to lay the pieces out. Samuel opened the notebook and slid out his penciled rail map, a filament, thin line arcing across prairie towns. With the pencil tip, he dotted places from old clippings. Ellsworth, Monmouth, Colorado Springs, dots forming a rhythm rather than a straight line. A week apart, 2 weeks, 3, matching freight timetables. Villisca sat right on a beat. Suppose a drifter exists, he rasped. He rides the schedule. But he circled Villisca twice. Here, another hand was waiting. Lamps positioned, cloths stitched in hurry, ledger box left blank, papers burned in the church. He does the killing. Someone else does the telling. In my head, his casework rose like wire. The stiff wire of the rails, the soft wire of doorstep gossip, the buried wire of debt. One tug on any line tightened the noose on all the others. A clever teller could steer the law, feed the town, and leave Samuel standing alone. He chose his next target, the post office again, but not the front. Behind it, a service hatch opened to a trash alley. The hinge was rusted. A pry would pop it. He didn't pry. He checked the ash barrel. Twine wrappers on top. Below, black ash salted with wax crumbs. He stirred with a stick, rolled aside the ash. Something hard flashed. A charred corner from a carbon telegram. He pinched it out and blew. One letter remained. A K with a hyphen. Just enough to point, not enough to print. ACC, he whispered, as if the rest sat there waiting. He pressed the ember into the notebook like pinning a venomous moth. Small evidence, enough to light a fuse. When we rounded to the front again, Harper leaned on a post, hat brim low, a dead cigarette between two yellowed fingers. He looked at Samuel, through me, and mostly into himself. "You going to write Rail Killer?" he asked, tired. "Readers swallow that. The other name you've been circling, he won't spit you back out in time." Samuel said nothing. Harper slid a folded sheet from his hat band and palmed it over like bait to a wary fish. "Tomorrow's timetable. Freight number 14 lingers longer than usual for a host swap. I'd bet your nameless friend keeps a schedule too." Samuel opened it. Purple, inked columns, a pencil double, slash darkening the pre-dawn slot. No signature, no stamp, only intent. "Why help me?" Samuel asked. Harper's mouth twitched. "Because I'm tired of writing about nameless devils." He paused, voice dropping a notch. "And because someone slid a note under my door last night. Don't trust Harper." He met Samuel's eyes. "See, we're the same in one respect. We're both being ghost-stricken." Wind kicked the post-office grit into our faces. I saw a small, dangerous light in Samuel's eyes, the kind you only find in people who've chosen a road with no escort. Night sealed the yard. The depot settled to the tick of a wind-up clock behind the window. Samuel stayed. He didn't go home. He sat on the platform steps, back to a post, the only steady light the signal lantern pulsing at measured intervals. Now and then he cracked the notebook, set down a single word, and shut it, as if nailing thoughts into timber. Ticket, blank, wax, soot, cologne. Near midnight the wind shifted, carrying a thin, cold tang, metal before rust. Samuel lifted his head just as a figure slipped along the east track. Tall, narrow shoulders, flat cap. He didn't hug the rail. He walked across, ties, toes straight, gait practiced for planks. Not a farmer, not a yard hand, a man trained by this road. Samuel rose in one motion. The man never glanced back. He cut across the cold bed and dissolved into the dark scene between two cars. Samuel sprinted, splashing a puddle, boards singing a long creep behind us. I clung to his shoulder, his heart hammered bone like a mallet. He rounded the gap. Nothing. Only a dying bead of tobacco under the axle, rolling and snuffing out. Samuel dropped to a knee, reached under the car. His fingers found metal, a track bolt head, freshly greased. Why would a drifter touch hardware? He stood, noting the mirror, smudges of coal now on both his pant knees, his own trace. He gave himself a thin smile. I leave marks too. He pocketed the bolt and turned. A weak light shivered up from the direction of the old church. Lamp. A second burn. He didn't hesitate. He plunged down the dirt slope, feet skidding once, hand clutching at grass roots. In his pocket, a dried bead of wax clicked against the notebook's spine, small, sharp, like a needle. The church door hung slack. No wind, yet it rocked. Samuel set two fingers to the edge and pushed. Cheap cologne, thin and over-applied, braided with warm ash and hit us square. On the floor, a new mound of ash the size of a plate, embers still red at the core. On top, a scrap not yet eaten curled upward, ink along its edge, ACC. Account or accounts. Samuel pinched it out of the heap. Skin seared. He froze half a beat, didn't let go. Behind him, a board ticked. A pair of pointed-toe shoes settled onto the second step. Samuel looked up and saw no face. Only the flat cap cutting a slice out of the moon. Freight 14. A low, husky voice said, "Not Kent's reedy wine. Stops 10 minutes tonight." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was a bulletin. "And you?" The voice paused a beat. "Won't make it." A porch nail snapped outside, the sound of a foot catching off center. Samuel lunged for the door. The step was slick. He slid half a stride, caught the jam, frame shivered, soot snowed a black collar onto his wrist. When he burst through onto the stoop, the cap was already gone, slipping down the slope, folding into the rails like a name into a ledger blank. Samuel stood breathing hard, the ACC scrap clamped between his fingers. He pressed it into the notebook and shut the covers like sealing a living thing in a box. His face had gone pale. His eyes went dark, not with fear, but because he'd seen the structure. Drifter, the feet. The teller, the hands. Money, the cue. Timetable, the pulse. He wrote the night's last line. If there are two, one kills, one edits. Then Velisca has more than blood. It has an editor. A freight horn bled in from far off, 2 beats early compared to Harper's sheet. Samuel jerked to the slant clock on the church wall. Off. Someone had twisted the timing. He glanced toward the depot. The signal lamp clicked up a notch earlier than it should have. And just then, at the post office, a door eased open the width of a palm and clicked shut again. The chapter's lock turned with a fresh drop of oil. The shadow, Walker gone, the storyteller withdrawn, and in Samuel's grasp, the warm ACC. Just enough kindling to set the drifter tail alight, if he can strike the match in time. A door locked from the inside. Night dropped over Velisca like a heavy quilt. Samuel went back to the Marlowe house. The crowd was gone. Only silence remained, so complete you could hear crickets ticking and wind slipping through plank seams. I followed him in, feeling as if we'd stepped into the belly of a wooden box clamped shut, where 8 souls still lay still, holding their breath for an answer. He stopped at the back door, fingertips reading the wooden bar. The crossbolt was thrown from the inside, tight and off. True. Samuel tugged and the wood squealed, a sound like fingernails raking a coffin lid. Locked from within, he murmured, "If the killer left, how did he get out?" My heart kept time like the boards under our shoes. In the Marlowe kitchen, the paradox sat on the sill like a brazen squatter, 8 dead in a sealed house. If the bolt was set from inside, did the killer stay? Have a key? Or did someone in the family live long enough to drop the bar and then collapse? The answers had to come from wood, iron, cloth, soil, not from mouths. Samuel opened his notebook. The nib bit the paper with a whisper. Back door, barred from inside. Killer couldn't exit here. He moved to the front. The iron lock was dark, the keyhole rim freshly scored. One clean vertical scratch the length of a thumbnail, sharp as a knife kiss. Samuel tapped it, and the tang of iron rose. Someone tried to open this with something other than a key, he said. He wrote, "Front door, fresh prime mark." I looked up at the sash windows. The panes were down, but one frame showed tiny nicks, as if a fingernail had hunted for a latch. Upstairs, a window brace had been shifted. Its edge was a lighter stripe, wood brighter where a stick had been pulled and pressed back. Samuel fetched a chair, touched the brace, loose at one end. He wrote, "Attic window, removed, reset." A chill ran my spine. That could be the route out. But if so, why leave sign? Why close every door only to leak a trace upstairs? Unless the trace itself was the point, stage a sealed house so the town would swallow something supernatural and stop asking about very human hands. Samuel bent to the kitchen sill. In the lamp's haze, on the old oil, dark would lay a pale, smooth skid, exactly where a heel would slip. Paint flaked off like thin scales. "A hard scramble," he said, and added, "Kitchen sill, outward heel slide." He straightened, eyes weighing the rooms like scales for time. How long to kill 8? He wasn't posturing. He was winding his own pocket watch. In the parlor, 1 minute. On the stairs, 20 seconds. Downstairs bedroom, 45 seconds. Upstairs, where the 2 girls were, he only marked 1 minute, then shut the page, refusing to look deeper. Fast math, just under 5 minutes. And that's in a metronomic fantasy with no resistance, no stumbles. Real life always wobbles. Too fast for one man, too tidy for one hand, he rasped. We looped back to the parlor. Beyond the obvious dark fan on the wall, a long, crooked rut cut the rug. A wooden chair had been shoved on a diagonal, 2 legs gouging paired tracks. The depth staggered, deep, then light, like when 2 people lift from opposite ends without matching strength. Carried, not dragged, Samuel said, jotting. Chair repositioned, at least 2 people. The line hit the floor like dropped iron. 2. Then the one madman with an axe, tail won't hold. It means coordination. 1 strikes, 1 holds, 1 watches. I glanced at Samuel. His eyes had moved past the porch gossip. We stopped beneath a shrouded mirror. He didn't yank the cloth. He brought the lamp close. On the ceiling above the children's bed, a distorted oval of soot, too high for a casual brush. Samuel raised the lamp and studied it. The patch had been stamped by a sooty hand after a long hold. Soot on skin pressed up, leaving a smudged print. The fingers were slim, long, Not the broad hand of the big, booted man at the depot last night. He wrote, soot hand mark, narrow, long fingers. Not same person as large shoe. At least 2 body types inside this house, he said, eyes closed as if to seal the thought. Different habits. Samuel returned to the front, dropped to one knee, and put his ear to the latch tongue. Set from within, he repeated. But the effect isn't hard to fake. One goes out a kitchen or attic window, the other throws the bolt, then slips through their agreed route. He underlined 3 times. Locked, from, inside equals staged effect. We climbed the stairs. The 4th step from the top had that familiar sag, the family's pause, spot when calling down. Samuel tapped the heel. The step squealed, long and sharp in the empty house. If one man went up and down, it would sink each time, he said. So why didn't the neighbors report it? He pointed at a fine scratch running along the opposite wall at hip height, sign of a hand bracing to shift weight toward the wall and keep the tread quiet. 2 moving in alternation, he wrote. One ascends as the other descends, staggering the squeaks. In a bedroom, he didn't lift the sheet. He stood at the mattress edge and studied the rug. 2 knee prints mirrored each other, one deeper, one lighter, oriented opposite. He pressed 2 fingertips into each, feeling different compression. 2 knelt at once, he concluded. One pinning, one striking. On the plank wall, 3 thin parallel scratches at chest height. Not axe channels, a knife flipped sideways. A second weapon, he wrote. Secondary weapon, slender knife. Not alone. Back at the sink, Samuel read the half, wipe. A clean arc sweeping inward, quitting at the rim. If it were one man, he'd finish the job, he said. Here I hear 2 beats. One wipes, one barks hurry. So the wipe stops. The nib scored the page. Aborted wipe, cut rhythm. Someone standing behind. On the kitchen hinge screw clung a tuft of rotten white fiber. Samuel had plucked a twin out by the tracks. He laid the new thread to the old on the page, a match. 1 thread caught inside, one out by the rails. The same cloth crossed both spaces. Someone squeezed out, he said slowly, carrying an edge shroud, outer coat, and shed strands in both places. In the parlor, Samuel planted his feet where the swing would start. He measured the span from bed frame to blood fan. He read the edge, not the mattress. Offset right, handed, a committed arc, he muttered like reciting notes. He crouched and tapped the fine spatter drifting off the main fan. Steady cadence, no flinch. Nerves numbed or practiced. No moral sermon, just a metronome. Then he slid his shoe half a step into the chair rut, testing the helper's stance. It all locked like a 2-part score. The axe line and the brace/cover line. We returned to the attic window. Samuel pushed, the brace budged. He skimmed a nail along the paint lip, a faint, fresh white smear in the outward direction. Under the sill, wood was scored inward. 1 mark, 2 directions. 1 out, 1 back in to set the bar, he said. The sealed house, accomplished from within by the last man out. He carved a heavy line. Locked from inside, a second hand. He stood very still. His lamp flared and shrank against the mirror shrouds until the room seemed to breathe like lungs after a sprint. He reopened the book and rebuilt the clock. The most plausible route if 2 coordinated. 1 sweeps upstairs, 1 down. They meet at the landing, pass a token, likely the lamp, split again. Finally 1 exits the window, the other sets the bolt. Total time compresses. Short enough the block doesn't fully wake. Short enough the dogs don't bark for long. Short enough that by morning the crowd will believe the miracle of a locked house. He wrote, slanted but sharp. 1 strikes. 1 holds. 1 maybe wipes. Locked from inside equals sleight of hand. On the jamb, a thin patch of soot skin shown. A sleeve, cuff, or forearm pressed there before the bolt was thrown. That cheap cologne ghosted around the mark. The same note Samuel had caught on the children's rug and again at the post office. A repeating scent drew an invisible string between kitchen and telegraph desk. He added, cheap cologne, recurring. The narrator's hand stood right here. We backed into the center of the house. Samuel lifted his gaze. The ceiling pressed low. Somewhere, his pocket watch counted off. Another heartbeat inside the house besides the silence. He spoke almost under breath, as if a loud word could tear the air. 1 man could do it if he were wind. But I hear multiple beats. I smell multiple smells. I see multiple hands. He set down his inference. Scenario A, one superhuman killer, contradicted by the wood. Scenario B, multiple actors in concert. Fits the traces. He drew out a chair and sat at the kitchen table. His palm warmed the page. Wind scratched the siding. In that pocket of quiet, I could almost hear the night of June 10th spooling backward. Bolt thudding, axe snapping, staggered feet on the fourth tread, a half. Wipe cut off by a bark, the attic rail pressed back from inside by the one who stayed last. Samuel closed the book. Without looking at me, he said, "If this is technique, it was practice. Not a thought dreamed up between rail cars. A plan." He stepped onto the porch and studied the bar one more time. "When this door shut," he whispered, "it didn't just trap 8 people. It bolted justice from the inside." He slashed a line across the page, big, bold enough to craze the paper. "Sealed house, not a miracle. Sealed house, a script." The house was no longer merely a scene. It was a chessboard. Every door, every bolt, every scratch was a piece placed. I followed Samuel and, for the first time, understood. The killer didn't just want to kill. He wanted to rewrite his own story in wood and blood. Samuel paused at the back step. He stooped and touched the iron. I heard the tired sigh, and under it a statement hard as steel. This was shoved home by a living hand. He didn't have to say more. The meaning was plain, no phantoms. A person of flesh and breath stood inside after the killing and threw the bolt. He wrote, "Back door, bar tight, pushed from inside out. Proof equals a living hand last inside." He turned to the parlor. At the fan on the wall, he didn't fixate on red. He lifted the lamp to the edge and found a nearly invisible glaze, the ghost of something held flush to the plaster and then removed, shielding that portion from spray. He measured with a rule, shoulder, width of an adult. He noted, someone stood and blocked. The blocker hugged the wall. The striker stood central. My pulse pounded, not alone. And if there was a blocker, that person was no accidental witness. They were an accomplice. The mad drifter's story shed another chunk of itself. We went back up. Samuel counted his steps. The fourth tread screamed. He knew it would. This time he didn't just listen. He tried towing, leaning his weight into the wall. The squeal dropped. He stopped and wrote, "Knows how to mute a wooden stare. Not chance." And I understood. A true stranger, a textbook drifter, can't know which step sings and which stays quiet in a house he's never seen. This one knew, or was coached. In the small back room, he didn't touch the bed. He raked the lamp across the ceiling. A set of parallel dark lines at chest height appeared. "Not axe," he said. Knife skated sideways. "Second hand." He wrote, "Axe plus knife equals 2 killers." The room shrank on us. I saw 2 grown men shoulder to shoulder in that narrow space the night of June 10th. One with an axe, one with a knife, moving like they'd rehearsed. A duet of violence. We went down to the kitchen again. The unfinished arc at the sink gleamed clearer in the shaky light. A clean sweep, then a stop. He wrote, "One wipes, one urges." Wipe aborted. At least 2 in the kitchen. Small evidence, but like a stitch running through the whole garment. Dialogue existed that night, between the wiper and the one hurrying him. Samuel stood still, pulled his pocket watch, and watched the second hand. Then he walked the whole route, rebuilding the cadence, from parlor to stairs to bedrooms to attic. He stopped where he needed, count whispering. Back in the kitchen, the tally edged past 5.5 minutes. And that was the no resistance fantasy. He snapped the cover shut and ground out. "Too fast for one." He wrote, pressing so hard the paper tore. "Minimum 2 perpetrators. One keeps time, one locks." Locked, from inside equals fake paradox. Wind slapped the siding. His lamp shook, throwing Samuel's shadow wide across the wall so his outline doubled. One man with a notebook, one with an axe. I shivered, unsure if I was seeing a shadow or the house replaying a memory. Before we left, he revisited the back door. He touched the bar lightly, eyes exhausted but bright. "When this bolt slid home," he said, "not just 8 were shut in. The truth was locked in here too." He wrote the day's last line, a straight carve that scored the page like a blade. "Sealed house, not a miracle. Sealed house, a script. Provisional truth and feeling." The morning after the survey night, Velisco woke into a quiet that wasn't peace so much as a drumhead pulled too tight. One touch, and it would split. Market stalls still opened. Wagon wheels still grated over crushed stone. The church bell still tolled. But a new hesitation flickered in the eyes of shoppers. They looked at one another half a beat longer, then dropped their gaze, as if a wall with the word "if" printed on it had risen between any two people. If the killer hadn't vanished down the tracks. If he was still right here. If that axe night was the work of many hands, not a single passing shadow. Samuel sat in a broom closet of a room above the saloon, the window filmed with dust so that the first light came in a gray ribbon. In front of him, his thick, frayed notebook. Beside it, a neat stack of blank newsprint. His right hand braced the table to steady the tremor. His left rested on the notebook cover like on an old scar. I stood behind him, close enough to hear his heart. No longer shattered as the first night, but knocking hard, economical, resolved. "Veliska needs to know," he said very softly, as if the words might tear the paper. "Even if what I have now is only provisional truth." He put the pen down. The first stroke scored the sheet like a knife cutting old varnish. 8 dead in a locked house. No miracles, no demons, only wood, iron, lamp oil, blood, and many hands. What we face is not a nameless demon passing through on the rails. It's our own shadow, enlarged by fear. The lines rose like tendons. He laid out, one by one, the traces he'd seen and smelled. The back latch pushed from within. Someone alive said it. The stair that squeals, yet someone knew how to walk it quiet. The parlor chair moved in the stuttered rhythm of 2 people carrying instead of one dragging. The thin knife flicks on the attic wall, not axe. The soot palm, long-fingered, imprinted on the ceiling. Each detail a stitch in the picture he could feel forming. One the town preferred to swap for a simpler postcard. The rail killer. When his nib reached the church ash, his wrist stalled. A dot of ink fell and bloomed like a lentil. He knew exactly how dangerous this point was. To write ash was to write destruction of evidence. And that was pointing at someone who hadn't gone anywhere. He didn't stop. Paper doesn't burn itself. A hand that knows the smell of ink and ledgers burned it. If the axe hand left, the pen hand stayed. He watches us in daylight. He folded page 1 and set it aside as if laying a brick. Page 2 came heavier. The sentences slid from listing into indictment. How the sheriff opened the door and let townsfolk trample the scene. How the label rail killer was issued like a sleeping pill. How the shrouded mirrors turned grief into ritual and the crime into an easy story. He didn't name names, but everyone in Veliska knew which chest carried the silver shield. Right then the door snapped open. Sheriff Dwyer stood there, eyes bruised like a man who slept on a wooden chair. "Mr. Stenner," he said, voice dragged up from the bottom of a tired barrel. "I told you. You're a father. You're not an investigator." "Stop." Samuel didn't get up. He only looked up, and that look made the man with the badge miss half a breath. "Night 1, Samuel said slowly. "You let the town in. Morning after, you let rumor in. Yesterday you hung a shadow on the rails so the town could go back to sleep. That's protecting?" A wash of red climbed Dwyer's cheeks. The color of a man touched where it stings, part shame, part anger. He glanced at the stack, hunting an excuse. "You mean to print this? You mean to panic a whole town?" "No." Samuel lifted the first page and held it at eye level like evidence before a jury. "I mean to wake one." The room cooled. Hallway wind pushed the stale night's liquor smell inside. I stood between the 2 men and listened to the silence harden. At last Dwyer rasped, dry as sawdust, "You'll regret it." He turned, heels thudding like coffin lids. The door clicked shut. Samuel sat a few more seconds without moving, then wrote again, like a man honing a nicked blade. The piece hit in the afternoon, when slant sun made the street dust sparkle like drying fish scales. Shopkeepers folded sheets for customers, hands brushed for half a beat shorter than normal. At the market's end, a blacksmith read the first lines aloud, eyes snagging on many hands, then swallowing. "Many," he echoed. "Many means who?" The question dropped into a metal pan and rang to all sides. In the saloon, men pressed the paper to beer sticky tables and murmured, "If it's true, could it be a neighbor? The one who borrows your axe?" On the church stoop, Reverend Kent gripped his frayed book, voice low but barbed. "There is only one truth. The devil did it." One. His flock looked at one another, not nodding as hard as usual. They had seen the shrouded mirrors and heard him confess, then swallow it back, seen him smile in the yard. They wanted one, but every sentence Samuel wrote was another thorn under that want. Harper, the county reporter, leaned on a porch post, watching readers. He turned pages with a fingernail, his mouth tugged into a thin smile. "He writes well," he muttered, speaking not to me, but to my shadow in the morning. "But write like this and sooner or later Jameson will make him mute." The word fell light as ash and hit the air heavy as lead. Samuel walked through the market with his head up, like a man who had tied a sheet to the town square pole and was ready to stand beside it. Faces turned. A few nodded almost imperceptibly, a few veered aside, some pretended to fuss with rope. In his pocket the notebook weighed like stone, but cut like a blade. His steps were even, each footfall like a wedge driven into the door someone had slammed on the night of June 10th. Near dusk, the boarding house thinned. Samuel returned to his room, the smell of sun clinging to the curtain like dry cloth. He set down his hat, poured a glass of water, hadn't yet lifted it when the floorboard at the door clicked. Something thin had been pushed under. He bent. A plain envelope. No stamp, no name. Coarse paper, smoke-tainted. He tore it. Inside, one yellowed scrap. The hand scrawled like someone who'd been walking in wind. "You are right. Only halfway. Want the other half. Cemetery, midnight." No signature. A gray-black smear on the edge came off on his fingers. Ash. I watched his hand clench, the paper crumpling into a mountain range. His whole body tilted toward a decision. A trap, I thought. Or a thread. Samuel stood still just long enough for the water to stop shaking. Then he tucked the scrap into the notebook and blew out the lamp. Go. Villisca Cemetery at midnight wasn't ink black. It was the gray of wet ash. The fog hung so low that Samuel's lamp carved only a small ring. Beyond it the night thickened like felt. Headstones rose and dipped like rotten teeth. The old willow in the center shook its long hair across its face. The earth smell, the old moss, the iron rust from the fence, and lamp oil mixed into an atmosphere that made it feel like breathing in a half-sealed tomb. Each time Samuel's heel touched gravel, the grind sounded like bone grit. A figure waited under the willow, dark cloak tied at the throat, hat brim hiding half a face. He stood straight but trembled, breath rasping like a bellows with a leak. "Mr. Stenner?" A thin, raw voice, as if the throat had been sanded. "It's me." Samuel set down the lamp. The yellow light turned dirty, washing half his face. Hollows under eyes, jaw set. "You wrote." The man's hand slipped from his sleeve. Thin, long-fingered, dusted with gray ash. The very smear from the envelope. "You're right," he said, but only halfway. There were many hands that night. And there is someone who doesn't want to see many in print. He lifted his face into the ring of light. I knew him before Samuel did. Sunken eyes, paper-pale skin, narrow nose, a scrub of beard. The face they said had disappeared. Jameson's former bank clerk. He hadn't disappeared. He'd been evaporated from the daytime ledger of stories. "I kept the book," he whispered, lips so dry they cracked blood. "The book with who paid for blood. I meant to bring it to court. But that night, they came first." The willow's shadow dappled his face with small, dark seals. Samuel moved half a step closer. "All of it," he said, short, heavy, like setting a stone between them to sound the depth. "Two went into the Marlowe house," he said, eyes fixed not on Samuel, but at the dark beyond his shoulder. "One cut, one locked, but there was a third who never stepped in. He waited outside, waited for word. I heard them say his name. I wrote that name every day. Jameson." The name dropped from his mouth like a bullet into water. No blast, but a deep whirl. The willow hissed, as if someone brushed past. The nearest stone seemed to tilt another half-degree, not from wind, but from a letter that shifted the ground. "I ran," he said, voice falling to a dry moan. "They know I'm alive. You printed this morning. You made them stir. Be careful. 8 won't be the last." Samuel didn't give an inch. He set his hand on the man's shoulder. His hand trembled, but the grip was as firm as a stake in mud. "If I back away," Samuel said, "who do those 8 graves think?" The last words broke rough, pinning my throat like a clamp on a spine. Tears sprang to the clerk's eyes. He turned away, chest pumping like a man at the end of a long run. He dug a quartered sheet from his coat, and shoved it at Samuel like a live coal. "I can't keep it." "One page. The rest buried." Samuel unfolded it. Numbers thick as a thicket. In the middle, a jagged line. Disbursement, Marlowe, June. Debt erased. Below, the twitching mark I'd seen on the brass plate at the bank. F. Jameson. The lamp leaped a finger of flame and slumped. The two men's shadows stretched over the stones and fused with the willows into a single edge less dark. "Handing it to me is signing your own," Samuel began, and didn't finish the word death. The clerk nodded like a man nodding at a sentence he didn't need read aloud. "I'll disappear," he said. "You won't see me. But remember, they don't just use axes. They use pens. Pens kill faster. You die without a sound." He turned, slipped into fog like a fish into a pond. I watched, wanting to call after him, but mud rose in my throat. Samuel stood alone beneath the willow. He opened the notebook and wrote, "For now, Drifter is a screen. Fact, a group. Name in the dark, Jameson." The nib dug so deep the sheet almost tore. He lifted his face toward a slice of moon torn by cloud. His features looked like a man who had walked over a crack in ice and not gone through. He had stepped past the safer edge of a father hunting his children's killer and into the place of a man defying the town's unwritten law. Don't write his name. On the way out, the wind turned, pushing fog across the path like a sudden flood. The church bell far off struck a short note, then slipped and drew a long wire across the neck, cold and taut. No one pulled that rope at this hour. I knew. I'd touched the mildewed line that morning. The bell rang by itself, as if someone wanted to say, "Enough." Samuel didn't stop. He hugged the notebook to his chest, lengthened his stride, soles biting the gravel crisp and hard. I watched his shadow stretch thin on the lane, a slanted stroke of handwriting heading toward town's first yellow lights. Behind us, the cemetery shut like a book not yet finished. Ahead, a new morning waited for one more letter to be printed, and that letter weighed like an axe laid on a scale. Back in the room, Samuel lit the lamp low. The flame fluttered like a squeezed heart. He took out the sheet with Jameson's signature and stared until his eyes watered without blinking. Part wind, part the promise he'd made in the Marlowe house, right for them. He exhaled a long hilltop breath and slid the paper into a cloth-lined envelope, tucked it into the inner pocket. "Tomorrow," he said, "I print the part they don't want to read." Out in the hall, footsteps paused for half a beat and moved on. No knock, no tap, just a reminder. He was being watched. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard the faintest scratch, like a fingernail on paint. Samuel didn't open. He sat, turned a fresh page, and wrote a line not for print but to remind himself. Provisional truth isn't lack. It's departure. I stood behind him watching his shadow tremble on the wall. In one corner of that shadow, the imagined axe and the pen joined into a single silhouette, dull steel head and sharp nib. I shivered. Both are tools for cutting. One cuts flesh, one cuts silence. Night thickened, pulling the window close to my face. Below, the street slept. Above, the bell kept still. Between them, a name lay in a cloth envelope, heavy as a stone on a chest. And in the morning, when sun slid over the red brick tower, everyone would know. In Villisca, they didn't just shroud mirrors, they shrouded ledgers. But one cloth had been torn back. One page had left the book. One man had chosen not to be mute. And when someone chooses not to be mute, bells ring by themselves, even if the rope on the tower hangs slack. The next morning, sunlight slid over the red tiles like a hot blade skimming a frozen surface. The second edition went to press. Samuel sat in the narrow print shop. Two men had to turn sideways to pass, breathing in hot lead and fresh ink until his chest felt tight. He set the front page dead center. No sensational headline, no shout, just a single black line, firm and straight as a spine. Provisional truth, too. A locked door from inside, a second hand. Beneath it he wrote in short, cold beats, like a ruler notching marks. Inside latch shoved. Squealing stair learned silent. Chair carried by two. Secondary knife on the attic wall, soot turning into the print of a slender hand. At the end, a small paragraph like a nail buried flush. At the abandoned church, paper ash. At the telegraph office, an empty box in the log. These voids weigh more than metal. The pressman pulled the lever, The sheet hissed between the rollers, a sound both dry and supple. "You sure?" he asked, tilting the page, lowering his voice till the machine swallowed half of it. "Sure," Samuel said, eyes on the wall clock like a man counting pulse. "I'll sign it." The pressman sighed, fed fresh stock, muttering, "Signing is burning bridges. Maybe this bridge deserves it." News moved faster than the smell of it. In the cafe, people read and tucked the paper into their inner coats like contraband. At the church gate, two retired teachers whispered, "Secondhand, who? Don't tell me," and the rest fell away. At the telegraph office, the thin, hollow-eyed clerk pretended to sort messages. His hand shook till he dropped the keys. And on the brick corner where the bank's brass sign flashed, a curtain fluttered the slightest bit though the air was still. Samuel left the print shop, moving as if through water, slow but never stopping. I walked close, hearing each heel bite concrete clean. He stopped at the market and bought 2 apples, the reflex of a father who had long carried extra for the girls. His hand paused half a beat at the counter, then he paid anyway. "For Elsie and Nora," the shopkeeper wanted to say, but didn't. She slid the apples into a paper bag, tucked in a candy as if by mistake, and turned away to wipe the counter. I watched his fingers press the bag, very lightly, as if holding a late promise. A thin moment. He lifted his face toward the end of the street where a little road used to lead home. Home, now only blood and cloth. He turned at once, as if a longer look might make him collapse. Harper waited by the drugstore awning, one side of his face in shade. No cigarette, unusual. "You did it," he said, plain, eyes steady. "This time you didn't just kick a hornet nest. You knocked the shelf." Samuel said nothing. Harper's voice dropped, gravel dry. "Don't walk alone. Double lock tonight. And don't trust me." He slid a tiny scrap into Samuel's hand. No writing, just a thread of deep blue-green, the very shade of the thread Samuel had pulled from the apron pocket. "Who gave you this?" "It arrived on its own," Harper said. He walked away, stepping as if careful not to let his shadow touch the sun. At noon the air went still. Samuel stopped by the telegraph again. The thin clerk saw him and swallowed, pasting on a stiff smile. "I'd like to see the June 10th movement log," Samuel said, mild as asking for the timetable. The clerk opened the cabinet and set out the book. The blank in the night column was still there, white as a blind eye. Today it had something new, a gray finger smudge in the top left corner, like ash. Samuel touched it lightly, looked up. "Who else works nights?" "Mr. Wallace," the clerk stammered. "Where is he?" "Out sick." Samuel nodded and wrote. "Train log, blank plus ash smear. Night man, Wallace, absent." As he closed the book, a drawer clanged behind the counter. Metal on metal, the cold ping of a trap sprung. Afternoon at the town hall smelled of old paper, sweat, and cheap soap, like a boat drying in the sun. Samuel sat straight-backed on a bench, eyes on the public notice board. The chamber door flew open. Men poured out, armbands, cravats, shining foreheads. They didn't look at Samuel, but the second pair of eyes you carry, in the back of the head did. One stopped, hair slicked, wine-colored tie, the bank's lawyer. He smiled with the precision of a ruled line. "Mr. Stenner, I'm told you write beautifully." "They also say I write true," Samuel said, flat. "Truth has a price," the lawyer murmured. "Some truths shouldn't be printed. For the common good." The coin good hit the floor and didn't roll. Samuel's hand slipped into his pocket and touched the sheet signed F. Jameson. "I write for the good of 8 graves," he said. "I'm not schooled beyond that." The rest of the day burned like coals under ash. Back at the boarding house for his coat, Samuel felt warmth in the door handle. Someone had just left. He opened. The room was as he'd left it. Something wrong anyway. The notebook wasn't where it should be. He stood still for 2 breaths, then slid open the drawer under the bed. The notebook was there. He'd hidden the original the night before, but the sheet with F. Jameson's signature was gone. In its place, a different scrap, scrawled, "Pens kill faster than axes. Fire is fastest." A spot of ash still warm. "All right," Samuel said, his voice dropping into something with no tremor left. He reached behind the cracked mirror where he'd stashed it and pulled out a hand-copied duplicate. I exhaled, he prepared. He slipped the copy into his inner pocket and buttoned it. No way back, I thought. He knew it too. At twilight, he went to the cemetery alone, leaving no word. I was drawn along like a string tied to his spine and the town's cold places. Under the willow, no one. Only a fresh shoe print pressed deep and wide. The sharp-toed kind of traveler wears, or a man used to going where others don't. By the trunk, a little patch of newly stirred earth the size of a teacup mouth. Samuel nudged it with the pen tip. Beneath lay a scrap of cloth envelope, the kind with lining to keep paper dry, singed. Someone had come before him, dug and half-burned. The clerk, Samuel said softly, not speaking the name. The leaves whispered like a runner's coat in a hall. No answer. At the far edge, a low figure flickered among the stones and slipped away before I could frame it. Samuel didn't chase. He stood and stared at the tiny hole as if it were a mouth better at keeping secrets than the living. He returned late. The innkeeper, a small-boned widow, met him at the stairs, voice low. "Someone asked for you." "Who?" "Didn't say." She glanced up at the ceiling stain where smoke had settled like a cloud. "Stood out there a long time." Samuel nodded, hand on the banister, the other tapping his inner pocket once. I caught the faint rasp of paper on cloth, a small sound that calmed something else in me. I thought he'd sit and draft part 3 immediately. Instead, he took out the 2 apples from morning. He set them on the table, their red skins glowing in the lamp's circle like 2 live dots on a charcoal sketch. He touched them, thumb across the cool peel. "That day," he said, not to me but to the place where no one sat, "I promised them a little music box at the post. Wind it and a bird sings." He laughed, a sound so hoarse it was almost a cough. I left early, figuring I'd be back by dusk. He went quiet, so long my heart missed. Then he pulled a sheet and wrote not an indictment, but something like a prayer. "For my 2 girls. I'm late. The music box isn't needed. I've traded the gift, a page. This one sings a single true note." He folded and tucked it into the notebook. That was the night's anchor, small, plain, piercing as those 2 red apples in the yellow room. Before he could set the period, the window rattled. Not wind. A pebble tapped glass and fell to the sill. Tick. Samuel doused the lamp. Darkness dropped. Only a line of moon leaked past the curtain. He eased the door. The hall was empty, but on the sill lay a small, knotted scrap of cloth, the kind used for quick coin. He untied it. Inside, a shard of mirror, corner of a pane smashed, and another length of deep blue thread. On the glass, writing in soot, curt and hard. "Tomorrow night, telegraph room." Cold slid up my neck like a silver spoon laid to skin. The telegraph room, the place with the blank box, the ash smear, the name left white like a rotten tooth. A trap, I thought. Samuel knew. He nodded, very slow. "A trap is still a road," he said, relighting the lamp. The flare caught the mirror and flashed like an eye. He set the shard beside the 2 apples and wrote, "Rendezvous, telegraph, night. Blue thread, recurring, shadow known." He drew a thin arrow from blue thread to post office. A small map took shape. Marlowe House, abandoned church, depot, post office, bank. 5 black dots, joined by hairline cracks like fractures in glass. Before sleeping, he slid the copy of the F. Jameson sheet into a fresh envelope, sealed it with wax, and addressed it, Harper. Then he added a line to himself. "If I don't return, print it." He hesitated and penciled a tiny question mark after Harper's name, not doubting the paper, doubting the man. He still tucked the envelope into the coat on the back of the door. Not trust, but no one else. Night went deep. Somewhere in town, a horse stamped. On the tower, the bell rope lay slack. In the upstairs room, a half-spent lamp burned low, light just enough to keep anyone on the street from seeing the face inside, but enough for me to watch Samuel's pen wear down again. He finished the next day's closer. "This is not a verdict. It's a running sum. 8 names plus 1 locked house plus many hands plus 1 blank in a log. Whoever means to subtract, show your math." The addition rolled out in a sky the color of unprinted pulp. Samuel left before the street lamps died, dropped the 2 apples in his pocket. Not to eat, to remember. He passed the fork toward the cemetery without looking. Curtains blinked like sleepy eyelids. Under the church eaves, Reverend Kent stood in the shadow, blinking too fast, working his rosary like a man counting rain. As Samuel went by, Kent gave his crooked, usual smile and spoke a line like a reversed prayer. The first sacrifice is always silent. Samuel didn't stop. "I'm not a sacrifice," he said. "I'm a caller of names." At the lip of the slope down to the post office, a black carriage sat with the blinds drawn. When the wheel crept an inch, I saw the brim of a flat cap in the gap, a traveler's cap, the one we've heard from so many mouths, rail killer. But the man under it wasn't alone. Beside him, a hard dark lapel cut from expensive cloth that doesn't crease, the office kind from the red brick block. Two shadows overlapped like misregistered type. "Tomorrow night, the Telegraph," Samuel said, as if reciting the soot line on the mirror. "Time to see if that blank has a voice." My heart kept time with his steps. We went down the grade through breath-like morning mist. Ahead, the post doors stood mostly shut, a new smear of mud on the step. Right above the frame, a deep blue thread was tied into a neat little bow, its tails hanging like an exclamation mark. It was almost pretty, scary for that very reason. The chapter's cliff closes on Samuel raising his hand to touch the blue bow, then lifting his eyes to the wooden sign that read Telegraph. In them I saw a strange light. Not rage, not fear, but the calm of someone who understands that from here on, answers won't live in anyone's mouth, but in the blanks on paper, blanks that can speak if you know how to listen. And tonight, we would listen to what that blank had to name. An open ending, a modern reader's judgment. Dawn in Villisca doesn't blaze. It dusts a thin layer of silver over the tiles, the steps, the black cloths draped across windows like a corpse's eyelids. The Marlowe house sits in the yard like a moored ship, its timber hull creaking as the cold tightens. Samuel is on the front stoop, his narrow back casting a long diagonal across the mist. The notebook lies open on his knee, edges furred from too much turning. The pen is set at an angle, its tip holding a bead of thick, dried ink, a sleepless eye. I stand behind him as I have these past days. No voice, no breath, no right to touch. In this town, silence is its own instrument. If you listen closely, you hear the off notes, the far rasp of iron wheels on rails, the church bell sometimes slipping half a tone, wind pouring through plank gaps like the sound of a newspaper being torn. Everything this morning reads like a sentence waiting on a period. Samuel doesn't write it once. He flips through what he's already put down, his fingers testing each page like a man trying the thin ice of a frozen pond. Each page is a fine cut. The axe stood in the kitchen corner with its parallel work scratches, the half-wiped arc around the enamel basin, the screaming stare no one woke to, the slender handprint and soot on the ceiling, the large, pointed shoe sunk by the coal pile, church ash, the blank box in the train log, the dark blue thread caught under a neighbor's sleeve button. These marks refuse to stand in order. They thrash, knotting like netted fish. Pull one way, and another part cinches tight. The early wind carries up the familiar marsh smell, damp, cold, with a coin's tang of metal. The old question returns, unworn. Where was the lamp during the killing? That pale brown ring the size of a lamp base on the hastily mended kitchen towel is an orbit. Samuel once laid a finger there, tracing the path of fire. Where did that light fall? Straight into a face, or low at the killer's feet to dodge casting shadows? The lamp holder wasn't the one swinging. The one swinging didn't need to see. Between them there's a mismatched breath. One hurried, one steady, one ordering, one doing. I didn't hear that night, but the body remembers like a song you almost know. The old church slips into mind like a cold draft. The smell of paper ash, burned ink, snuffed wax braided to blood that should be dry by now. Ash is memory ground fine. Whoever burns memory doesn't want memory back. And whoever burns it in a church is borrowing a counterfeit absolution. But what absolves a telegram that said, accounts settled before the murders? That yellowed page with the crooked F. Jameson still feels hot under Samuel's thumb, a signature sharp as a blade. Some axes don't need honing. Some doors don't need prying. Some deaths are signed in ink. Samuel shuts his eyes and recounts June 10th with the clock in his chest. A minute in the front room, 20 seconds across the stairs, 45 for the first strike, another minute in the attic. A rain of blows too much for one body in a house with squealing wood. He has written, too fast for one man. Now the line darkens, engraved in both ink and blood. Not one, many beats. Perhaps three, one outside waiting on a signal. The proof doesn't shout. The different angles of the covered mirrors, The two depths of footprints by a bed, the half circle of cleaning cut short. Even incompletion has rhythm. A wagon goes by, wheels on stone scrape like a pen across tin. Samuel pinches the bridge of his nose. The temple pulse ticks. He can still write fast. I've watched him break gossip with hard, short lines. Today the pen is slow. Maybe because he knows. At this point, words can turn into a noose, not just for his neck. I want to tell him that in my century, you can pull DNA from a dry flake on an axe handle, lift latent prints from soot, trace a jumper's travel off a torn ticket corner. I'm not allowed. All I can do is remember for him. The latch set from inside, the attic window pried and reset, the fourth stair that screams, the chair that was carried, the lamp turned by a hand at home in his kitchen, the blank in the train book, the soot-scrawled shard promising tomorrow night, telegraph room. Blanks that talk, if you know how to listen. A crow drops to the fence, feathers soaked, eyes black as a dry well. It croaks twice, metal on metal. In its eye I catch my own reflection, an unnamed shadow. If I could touch one thing from that night, what would it be? The axe? The blue thread on the stoop? The torn edge of the missing account page, to feel which way it ripped? But I don't get to touch. I only get to look, and my looking both warms and salts the wound. Samuel rises. He folds the book and tucks it into the leather like hiding a bird still breathing. Down the steps, each tread its own note. Me, F.A., me, re. He heads for the gravel road. I know he'll swing by the graveyard. He always does after a bad night. A hand on cold stone. A few words so the heart doesn't split. I trail him. When his figure blends into the poplars, I look back at the house. The mirror cloths are dead still, but I can't shake the feeling that if you lifted any one of them, it would throw back a face. If not the swinger, then the payer. If not the payer, then the eraser. If not the eraser, then the one who stayed silent when speech was due. On the gravel, his heel crunches old glass, edges like the cut of a stair. From the fields come kids' sing-song, a cart's clop, a whetstone's hiss somewhere, enough to raise the hair on my neck. In that ordinary noise there's a false note the sleepless ear picks out, waiting. The town waits, for a Sunday story that goes down easy, for the rail killer to be their moral life raft. He's a demon, not us. For Samuel to tire or go mute, for the ledger page to finish burning. Waiting is power's art. Whoever waits longest wins, because most people wear out. Morning light in the cemetery isn't white or gold. It's the wet silver of a knife just rinsed. Wind plays the frayed flags to a tearing sound. Samuel stands at the two small graves, palm on stone as if to give what blood he has left. No tears, just breath. I stand behind him. His shadow folds into the two markers until they're a three-headed mute. I think through his route, the slender soot hand, the big shoe at the depot, the church ash, the half-burned account, the empty cell and the train log, the blue thread. Stacked together, they don't make a statue. They make a barrow. Truth doesn't stand. It lies down. Under it are names that will never be carved. He sets the notebook on a stone and snatches it right back. Here, even a headstone can be bought. A distant whistle jeers. In my head, I see the flat-capped drifter, axe under arm, face formless. Maybe he did pass through. But the church ash says, a local stayed to erase. The Jameson flourish says, a hand-set pen like a knife. Two silhouettes overlay like panes of glass, crossing at the moment the kitchen door was latched from within. A colder, older voice flips on in me. If it were only the rail killer, the case would be closed. If it were only a townsman, someone would have been offered up. When two darknesses meet, truth turns to legend. Wind rises. A wet petal sticks to my cheek like a cool compress. I feel buried here with the questions. I want to shout a name. Jameson, Kent, the jumper, just to finish this hanging ending. I'm shackled to my role, the powerless witness. I only get to look. Samuel turns and faces the space where I stand. In his eyes there's a kind of knowing. Not that he sees me, but that he senses someone outside history watching. He nods as if passing a torch. I take it, not by hand, by memory. And I pass it to you, who've walked 10 chapters with me. I'm not handing you a culprit. I'm handing you a locked house, a town that blindfolded itself, a torn ledger, and two rails running forever. You have to choose where to lay the axe. We leave the graveyard. Light cuts it in two, one side warm dim, one side cold bright. Truth is probably like that. The warm half is what we invent to go on. The cold half exists without our consent. The night's truth ran through too many hands to hold shape. Each took a little. Sand, salt, blood. It isn't a clear stream now. It's silted river. Looks crossable from this bank, but step in and you don't reach the other side. Back on the stoop, Samuel sits the exact spot, like a clock hand returning to 12. I lean the post, watch the dusty road. My part, the one hung between two centuries, is almost done. I'll draw back from this house like mist off a field, leaving a few wet rings on the grass. Before I slide into the dark, I'll tell you something in the present tense. Even with my centuries science, latent prints that bloom under powder, DNA that speaks, travel data that maps steps, you'd still face the same fork, the convenient lone shadow, or the many familiar hands. Technique tells you what was touched. Who allowed the touch belongs to the community. And communities, in 1912 or 100 years on, are built to prefer silence. A corner of a mirror cloth twitches in the breeze. In that blink-thin slice, the glass throws four things: stove, lamp, stair, and a forearm slipping past. Not enough to name. Enough to keep you awake. I look at Samuel. He closes his eyes and exhales. The sun climbs another finger width. On the street, the newsboy hawks a fresh headline. Not Samuel's. Rail killer returns. Kids tear after him, shrieking. The bell hits an off note again. In the red brick corner, the bank's curtain stirs. At the post, a box in the ledger stays white as a blind eye. In the upstairs room, two red apples sit unbruised in a crock. That's where the feeling of this chapter anchors. Two whole apples, two promises that missed their moment, and a newspaper page that sings a single true note. I step off the porch as Samuel's shadow slips into the morning market. The wind carries a sentence, quick and sharp as a razor, brushing the back of my neck. A modern's verdict on an old crime. Justice has died a second death. The road carrying Samuel back to the boarding house is a tight, drawn wire. At each step, he listens for the ground to answer. Nothing. Just damp grit, and a promise already broken. The two small gifts he'd asked the shopkeeper to wrap before his trip. They're still in the drawer, paper smelling faintly of oil. Presents with no recipients become weights tied to a life. They kept him from collapsing, and they dragged him under whenever he tried to breathe. Since that day, he's eaten oddly, slept in tatters, talked to himself. People say he looks half-crazed. No one understands it's his only way to keep his mind from bursting. At noon, the inn is empty. Samuel sets the notebook on the table and lights an oil lamp, though the room is bright. The flame steadies his hand. He takes out the yellowed sheet the bank clerk gave him under the willow. Payment. Marlowe, June. Debt cleared. At the bottom, a hurried slash of a signature. F. Jameson. Beside it, he places a sliver of depot chalk he pocketed by the coal cars. Two small things face each other on the wood like the twin eyes of a single head. One money, one rail. I stand by the window. Light slants in. Dust hangs like very slow rain. Time loosens, then pulls taut again. It's time to try laying the shards into two, maybe three mirrors, good enough to catch a face for a moment. Samuel starts to write. Not a news story, but three scenarios. Each is a route. Each route, a prayer turned down. Scenario 1, the drifter. A shadow jumps from a boxcar. Pointed shoes. No face, only a cap. He slips through the dark, opens the attic window, crawls in, uses the house axe, kills fast enough to beat the shrieking stair, slips back out the kitchen, skids a gray heel mark along the painted sill. He vanishes into mist and catches the next freight. Foundation, a pattern up and down the Midwest. Anchor image, the chalk code A, 12 on a car's side, and dead cinders peppering a collar. Samuel draws a thick line. What fits? The shoe, the fresh coal. What doesn't? The deliberate blank in the train log, the church ash, the covered mirrors, the half-white, the slim soot hand on the ceiling, the carried chair. A real drifter doesn't stage ritual. A drifter doesn't burn ledgers. A drifter doesn't need a whole town's cooperation by silence. Scenario 1 makes a handsome curtain, true exactly where the crowd needs it to be. He writes, enough to soothe, not enough to wake. Scenario 2, the familiar, a face from the market, knows the axe, the lamp, the screaming fourth stair, the basin set a hair off square. He, and likely another, works very fast, very clean, sets the inside latch to make a locked room miracle. He exits the attic window. The one who remains bars the door, shrouds mirrors, moves a chair, wipes half a circle, sets a lamp on a hastily mended towel. Lamp points one way, fabric blocks the other. Anchor image, the dark blue thread snagged under a neighbor's cuff, dropping to the stoop like a private, pleased laugh. Another line, what fits, every kitchen habit. What's thin, the motive big enough to carry a tight night and a silent next day. Jealous trade can spark an axe. But who burns paper? Who leaves the depot book blank? Who tells the post to keep its mouth shut? Here the familiar can't stand alone. Scenario 2 needs 3 behind it, a thicker shadow. Scenario 3, the alliance. One hand swings, one hand locks, one hand burns and signs. Downstairs, an axe. Mid-level, ceremony. Upstairs, the signature. The signer moves the others with debts and the hope of not dying. In exchange for quiet, a note is forgiven here, a contract promised there, a threat of audit elsewhere. Anchor image, the empty square in the train log, a deliberate hole in a cloth, and the 2 wrapped gifts still waiting in the shop drawer. Samuel doesn't punctuate. He holds the pen upright until a single drop rounds on the margin. It spreads like a new eye. He looks through me, or past me. This is judgment, he says softly, not a verdict. In this chapter he accepts a word he hates, provisional. Call it that, and you stay honest. Call it conclusion, and you're lying. A modern investigator, standing here, could likely tighten or invert a couple of links, but would still have to choose. Choosing is the hard part. A knock. Harper in the doorway, cap low, eyes wired. He doesn't step in. They won't let you print it, he says through the crack. In return, they'll hand you a piece that isn't real. You want peace, or you want insomnia? Samuel doesn't answer. Harper smiles and leaves a nail-rust sentence behind. Don't forget, I told you not to trust me. He's gone. Maybe he belongs to the only side his trade permits, the side that sells papers. Afternoon slides across the glass. The boarding house yellows the sick way of cooled grease. Samuel files the sheets, cinches the book with a leather tie. He stands, takes from the drawer the 2 wrapped gifts. He doesn't open them. He lifts them to a high shelf out of easy reach. From here on they'll be his private clock, measuring time not in hands but in lack. That's the emotional anchor I choose for this stretch. 2 oil paper parcels, twine crossed tight, sitting like small stones propping a door between past and present. Evening, the wind shifts. Hymn thin from the church. From the yard, couplers clink like a dry laugh. In the telegraph office, a narrow light blinks with the steadiness of an eye refusing sleep. Let me talk to you, as if we're scanning a data set. Rhythm, repeat, drift. Repeat is the rail killer pattern. Rhythm is the in-house choreography. Drift is the blank, the ash, the blue thread. Overlay all 3 and the overlap is small, but there. It spells a short, central line, not alone. Here I want to add what my time can add. Not to save Samuel, he's already lived past us, but to put us fairly in the mirror. Suppose, DNA from the axe handle. Possible, matched to a file. No, the files didn't exist. Suppose, latent prints on the lamp. Possible, but the house was trampled by 100 hands. Suppose, traced the telegram sender from the register. Possible, but that page is half burned and the rest is missing. Modern forensics throws light, it doesn't build the road. Roads are habit, power structure, collusion slipping backward into shape. Without touching those, any conclusion stays a shallow cut. Samuel leaves the inn and walks against the wind toward the depot. The rails stretch like pencil lines on black paper. He stands at the edge, staring into the point where the bars meet the dark. I hear him count, slow and clear, as if summoning a spirit. One hand swings. One hand locks. One hand burns. One hand signs. He doesn't add names. He lets the quartet hang in the night, so anyone passing can try their fingers for fit. In my city they'd call that a one-size mask. A man stands 2 doors down in the bank's window shadow. I catch a slice of very clean collar and the small metronome tap of fingers on the sash. Maybe Jameson, maybe not. At this range the glass won't give up a face. The pains are too good, they throw us back at ourselves. Night deepens. A thin rain. Samuel returns to the Marlowe stoop and sits where he always sits. This time he sets the notebook on the floor and leans his spine into the post. He doesn't write. He just listens to rain thud on the mirror cloths, a steady knocking, like a code from the far side. You and I have come up to this wall. I rejoin Samuel one last time. He's fallen asleep on the stoop, seams showing, stitches of exhaustion holding him together. Next to him, a small thing pokes from the leather case, his pocket watch. The minute hand is jammed at 1:12, not by chance, but because that night a jolt knocked it off its track. Let this be the chapter's final anchor. A watch stuck not for lack of power, but from a blow. A life whose time has run crooked ever since. From that instant on, every day for Samuel was an overlong 1:12. I'll close with a line I want to hand you, the modern reader, like a fresh, spreading drop of ink. Pick a scenario, but don't forget the others are still breathing. If you pick the rail killer, answer the blank in the train log. If you pick the familiar, answer the ash in the church. If you pick the signature, answer the shoe print by the grass. To choose is to shoulder a debt, the debt of explaining what you chose not to see. The rain thins. On the boarding house table, the two gifts lie untouched, twine unfrayed. On the bank's glass, the face behind the curtain stays hidden. At the depot, a new chalk mark appears. N3 with a slash. At the post office, a clean sheet is clipped into the register, waiting on words. On the mirror, the cloth lifts and settles with the breeze. I don't raise it. I leave that gesture to you. Treat this as a semicolon, not a period. If you want a short, sharp sentence to carry like a pocket shard, take Samuel's. One he never printed, only set with his eyes on a blank page. Justice doesn't die once. It dies by the number of hands laid on the cloth.